That day, after the news of Jian Wushuang's death spread, all the major powers in the depths of the universe began to make their moves. In the solar system, the Golden Crow Prince's laughter could be heard. Ha ha ha, blood sword, an eye for an eye. You killed me, so someone will naturally kill you. It's just that I can't personally take your head off. The Golden Crow Imperial Prince, who had recovered from his injuries, flew up from the sun. His entire body was covered in flames and he looked like a god. His handsome face, however, was filled with resentment and pleasure. Just as the entire universe was in turmoil because of Jian Wushuang's death, a trace of divine power was wandering aimlessly on the ancient path of stars. The divine power was Jian Wushuang. That day in the 16 cities, Jian Wushuang's divine power was almost exhausted and his divine body was crushed by Qiulong. If it were anyone else, they would have died. It was a pity that Jian Wushuang was a perfect chaotic life form. At that critical moment, Jian Wushuang made a prompt decision and finally used the second innate ability that he had awakened, Divine Power Disintegration. Divine Power Disintegration was not an earth-shattering killing move. It was the last trump card that Jian Wushuang had. It could break down Jian Wushuang into the most primitive divine power particles and attach them to anything. As long as there was a trace of divine power, Jian Wushuang would not die. However, the life lamp in the Divine Life Palace would shatter. In the end, Jian Wushuang used this gifted superpower to absorb the Tarot Divine Sword and Chen Kuan Ring into the divine power. In the end, under the explosion, the divine power was dispersed and a trace of it shot far away. However, for some reason, Jian Wushuang had not woken up after 100 years. Instead, he was wandering in the void in a daze. As time passed, he kept floating and wandering in the void like a rootless duckweed, rolling with the waves. He was also like a lost child who could not find his way home. No one noticed him. Jian Wushuang had been floating in the 16th city for 100 years. He followed the wind, crossing countless mountains and seas, crossing many battlefields, and witnessing one slaughter after another. He was like the loneliest passerby in the world, who had seen the rise and fall of the tide, life and death. Finally, he floated out of the 16th city. In the dark, there seemed to be something guiding him to a certain place. The 15th city, the 14th city, the 13th city. 500 years had passed, but Jian Wushuang was still unconscious. He floated in the void in a daze and passed by several cities. He did not know where he was going. He just followed the will of the unseen world and floated further away. Finally, he had returned to the 10th city. When he reached the 10th city, the guidance became even more intense. He floated around and once again arrived in front of the God Refining Tower. Several hundred years had passed, but the God Refining Tower had not changed. Many ultimate rulers gathered in front of the God Refining Tower, their faces filled with eagerness. They hoped that they could get a good ranking in the God Refining Tower. And at this moment, no one noticed a trace of divine power brush past them. Then, with a xiao sound, it quickly entered the God Refining Tower. When he entered the God Refining Tower this time, perhaps it was because Jian Wushuang had passed through the tower before, he did not encounter any obstacles. He passed through the first 7 levels and arrived at the 8th level. God Refining Tower, 8th level. This was also the last level that Jian Wushuang had passed. Here, he had met a Jian Wushuang, who looked exactly like him and had perfectly replicated all his swordsmanship superpowers. In the end, Jian Wushuang had used all his skills to kill him. When he arrived at the 9th floor, he did not even have time to take a look before he felt a huge force coming out and directly driving him out. Boom! Boom! In the void of the 8th level of the God Refining Tower, space was constantly being torn apart. A pitch-black whirlpool black hole appeared. An invisible force was drawn out of the black hole, as if it was summoning Jian Wushuang in. The next moment, the divine power that Jian Wushuang had turned into shot straight into the sword. The 10th city. Lord Blue, the guardian of the ancient path of stars, was in a private room in the fortress of the 10th city. A blue-robed figure with a veil covering her face was sitting cross-legged on a futon. Suddenly, the figure seemed to have sensed something, and her long eyelashes twitched. Then, a pair of beautiful eyes slowly opened, and a strange light flashed in them. "You're back as expected." Lady Blue chuckled under her veil. Then, she stood up and walked out of the room. Turns out Lord Blue was a female. Bang! The door of the room opened automatically, and a series of respectful greetings came out. "We respectfully welcome Lord Blue out of seclusion." "We welcome Lord Blue's exit of seclusion." Lord Blue nodded slightly and said, "Someone, sort out all the information on the ancient path of stars and hand it to me." "Yes." The divine armor guards dispersed. Lord Blue stood with her hands behind her back as a look of contemplation flashed through her eyes. With a flash, she disappeared from the fortress and headed toward the God Refining Tower. 9th level of the God Refining Tower. The divine power that Jian Wushuang had transformed into turned into Jian Wushuang after a moment of blurriness and distortion. At that moment, Jian Wushuang, who had fallen into a deep sleep, suddenly woke up. Jian Wushuang." Jian Wushuang suddenly opened his eyes and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. Then, he looked around and was shocked. "Where is this place?" Jian Wushuang's pupils contracted and a look of disbelief filled his face. He was surrounded by a chaotic void and the heavens and earth were dark. It was as if the chaos was created when yin and yang were separated and the universe was born. Countless traces of the most primitive laws of origin energy were flowing in the air. Wind, rain, thunder, lightning, earth, firmament, sword Dao, saber Dao. There were countless laws here, and they were all the purest and most ancient laws of origin energy in the world, born at the beginning of the universe. The most primitive and pure power of the origin of rules was like a vast ocean. It was extremely dense and enveloped Jian Wushuang. It was a pity that the origin power could be seen and touched, but it seemed to be sealed by a force and Jian Wushuang could not absorb any of it. "What's going on?" Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with a thoughtful look as he looked at the void. In the void, countless origin source laws condensed and finally formed two words. Heart observation. Heart observation? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and looked at the two words with rapt attention. His eyes gradually lit up with a thoughtful look. "Is that so?" Jian Wushuang muttered to himself thoughtfully. Then, he sat down cross-legged and began to meditate quietly. The greatest good fortune in the God Refining Tower had begun. The 9th level of the God Refining Tower was filled with origin laws. The law aura here was far more concentrated than anywhere else on the ancient path of stars. Even the river of enlightenment in the Divine Life Palace could not compare. Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged quietly and looked at the two words, heart observation. A thoughtful look flashed in his eyes. If I'm not wrong, the test of the 9th level should be to comprehend the two words, heart observation. Jian Wushuang muttered to himself and started to carefully review every level of the God Refining Tower that he had passed. He remembered that the first level of the God Refining Tower had the energy-devouring beasts. When he was killing the energy-devouring beasts, he had used the Wuxia divine sword to crush and obliterate them. The second level was the bandaged swordsman. On this level, although Jian Wushuang was still using the most ordinary swordsmanship, the divine power and origin of sword principle that he exerted were far higher than those on the first level. Then, the headless commander on the 3rd floor, the Gale swordsman on the 4th floor, the ancient sword saint on the 5th floor, divine general Fei Hong on the 6th floor. The further he went, the more divine skills Jian Wushuang used. When he defeated divine general Fei Hong, he had used all his divine skills except for the trump cards. Every time he broke through a level, Jian Wushuang could feel that the aftermath of his divine power and some divine power were absorbed by the void in the God Refining Tower. On the 7th floor, another Jian Wushuang, that looked exactly like him appeared. His simulacrum could accurately use every divine power he had used in the first few levels. Jian Wushuang had used all his skills and finally defeated it with the Eternal Night. After that, it was the 8th floor. There was no more opponent on the 8th floor, only a sword stone. There was a sword mark on the sword stone, but no one knew who had left it. Even with Jian Wushuang's amazing talent in sword principle, it took him nearly 60 years to comprehend the true meaning. In the end, Jian Wushuang arrived at the 9th floor. Before he could see anything, he felt his vision go black as he was expelled by a huge force. It was as if heaven and earth could not contain him and he was out of place. This time, Jian Wushuang had transformed into the most original divine power and entered the 9th level of the God Refining Tower that no one had ever stepped into before. Perhaps from the start, this God Refining Tower was not a place for trials. Instead, it was a gift from the ancient path of stars. The so-called trials were just different gifts that were decided according to everyone's different Tao. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered as he lowered his head and muttered, "However, only those who can reach the top of the God Refining Tower have the right to receive this gift." Well then, this means... Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and looked at the two words. He said in a deep voice, "As long as I can comprehend these two words, I'll be able to devour and absorb all of the origin laws here. Once I do, I'll be able to break through to the ultimate ruler realm, or even higher." Thinking of this, Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and started to think. Heart observation. If his guess was correct, the main point should be the word heart. Heart, what was it? Jian Wushuang slowly closed his eyes. The heart should be referring to the original heart, the Tao that one had advocated in the depths of one's heart. Gradually, Jian Wushuang's mind became empty, as if he had returned to the ancient world, back to the Tianzong dynasty, back to the Sword Marquis Mansion in Bahui Commandery, Tianyan Province. That was the place where he began his sword Tao. That was the first time he had held the hilt of his sword tightly when he was young. That was his original intention when he first started to practice the sword. Jian Wushuang started to search for the original heart that he had long forgotten and had no idea where it went. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye thousands of years had passed. Jian Wushuang was still immersed in the search for his original heart, and was in the deepest level of comprehension. Meanwhile, the outside world had already changed. On the ancient path of stars, the biggest change was when Qiulong challenged 8 overlords and won 8 of them. He became the new king of the 8 cities. The 18th city on the ancient path of stars was also the final city. A grand ceremony for the coronation of a new king was about to begin. Qiulong was sitting on a throne. Except for Lord Blue, the rest of the 8 magnates were sitting under him. Some of them were trying to please him, some of them were expressionless, and some of them had mixed expressions. The overlord was also among them. However, at this moment, there was no trace of overbearing majesty on his face. He was like a vulture to the extreme, lowering his head and not saying a word. The last time they fought in the overlord's divine palace, it ended with his defeat. Under Qiulong's strange power, his indestructible overlord body was completely suppressed, and he was no match for Qiulong. In the end, he had no choice but to tell Jian Wushuang where he was going and let Qiulong leave after destroying his overlord divine palace. Everyone, to be honest, it's really hard to reject the public sentiment for me to hold the coronation ceremony this time. Otherwise, with my humble and low-key personality, I wouldn't have liked such an extravagant thing. Qiulong tilted his head, his right elbow supporting the throne, and the back of his hand supporting his chin as he said with a smile. The overlord, the young clan leader of the Maluo clan, the 9 Stars Saint Sun, and the other emotionless big shots twitched their lips when they heard this. They finally witnessed how shameless Qiulong was. However, they all remained silent and did not say anything. They knew that the reason why Qiulong suddenly gathered them was not to witness him ascend to the throne. He must have a plan. The young emperors of the Great Sun Divine Kingdom, the young princes of the Defeng Divine Kingdom, and the Blood God and Scarlet Sun Demon Master of the Blood Sky Hall all chimed in with a smile. The new king's seat will naturally be occupied by the strong. Lord Qiulong's strength is outstanding, so he should be sitting on the throne. After Qiulong had defeated the 8 overlords, these people had announced their allegiance to him. When Qiulong heard this, he immediately laughed and said, "The 4 of you are the most sensible." After saying that, Qiulong turned his eyes to the overlord and the others. He laughed sinisterly and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, have you prepared any gifts for my ascension to the throne?" The overlord, the young clan leader of the Maluo clan, and the 9 Stars Saint narrowed their eyes. They knew that Qiu Long was about to reveal his true intentions. They cupped their hands and said, "Lord Qiu Long, we have prepared. Look, I have prepared a supreme-grade divine medicine that can increase one's divine power by 30%. Before he could finish, Qiu Long raised his head and interrupted him with a cold expression. "Supreme-grade divine medicine? Are you trying to fool this lord? How can you even take out that kind of trash?" The 9 Stars Saint's face turned ugly. He suppressed his anger and asked, "Then may I ask what you want, Lord Qiu Long?" Qiu Long laughed. His gaze swept across the faces of the 9 Stars Saint's son, the Overlord, and the young clan leader of the Maluo clan. He licked the corner of his mouth cruelly and said with a fake smile, "I want all the God-sealing tablets you have." "What?" The expressions of the 9 Stars Saint's son, the Overlord, and the others changed. The God-sealing tablet was their only purpose for coming to the ancient path of stars. They had paid too much for it. If he handed over the God-sealing tablet now, wouldn't all his efforts on the ancient path of stars go down the drain? This Qiu Long really had a big appetite. "Lord Qiu Long, please forgive us for not being able to hand over the God-sealing tablet." The 9 Stars Saint suppressed his anger and cupped his hands. "Oh? So you're not giving me face?" Qiu Long twisted his neck, making ka-ka-ka sounds, and said with a fake smile. The first prince and the young empress, who were standing on both sides of him, had cold glints in their eyes. A wave of overwhelming coldness was directed at them. The 9 Stars Saint's son, the Overlord, and the young clan leader of the Maluo clan were all shocked. The young clan leader of the Maluo clan, who had the worst temper, slammed the table in front of him and stared at Qiu Long. He said, "Qiu Long, don't go too far." The 9 Stars Saint's son and the Overlord stood up as well. They stood behind the young clan leader of the Maluo clan, exuding their own pressure. Seeing this, the smile on Qiu Long's face gradually disappeared and he said indifferently, "So what if it's excessive? So what if I don't go too far?" As soon as he finished speaking, Qiu Long made his move. A chain shot out from his back and was flung toward the neck of the young clan leader of Maluo. "Good!" The young clan master of the Maluo clan let out a loud roar. His arm, which was as thick as a giant tree, instantly shot out. It carried a terrifyingly huge force as it blasted toward the chain. The Maluo clan only cultivated their physical body and not their divine abilities. They were born with divine strength and their strength was extremely terrifying. As soon as this punch was thrown out, the void trembled. This punch was enough to overturn mountains and seas, crack the earth, and shatter the heavens. Bang! A huge explosion sounded at the point of collision. The terrifying force of the punch directly broke the chain. Qiu Long licked the corner of his mouth and hissed. Before the force of the Maluo's punch could be completely dispersed, thousands of chains had already appeared behind his back and were once again thrown at him. Just as the two of them were about to start a world-shaking battle, the 9 Stars Saint suddenly transmitted a message. "Maluo, don't be reckless. We are not Qiu Long's match. Let's retreat first." Looking at the thousands of chains that were charging toward him, Maluo's expression changed. He knew that Qiu Long had yet to make a move. He let out a low roar and used Maluo's power again to break the chains. After that, he stomped on the ground and flew into the distance. The Overlord and the 9 Stars Saints' faces also darkened. They each performed their secret skills and left instantly. The first prince, Blood God, and the others were about to give chase when they saw the three of them disappear. However, Qiu Long waved his hand and said lazily, "Let them go. Anyway, there are still tens of thousands of years before the Grand Clan gathering begins. If they all die, who's going to bring me joy?" "Yes." The first prince and the others smiled and agreed. Qiu Long raised his head and looked at the Overlord and the others who had turned into black dots in the sky. A hint of mockery flashed in his eyes. At the same time, outside the ancient path of stars, the entire universe was in a turmoil because of Jian Wushuang's death. Divine Life Palace, Supreme Divine Palace. The Blood Wave Supreme and the Supreme Giant Axe were sitting in the main seats, and the black-clothed men who had been sent to find out about Qiu Long had returned and knelt respectfully at their feet. Bloodwave Supreme, Supreme Giant X, we've found information on Qiulong. Tell me the details. The Bloodwave Supreme and the Supreme Giant Axe exchanged a cold look. Yes. The few men in black lowered their heads and quickly began to narrate. After the time for one incense stick to burn, the black-robed men turned into black shadows and left the Supreme Shrine. The Supreme Shrine fell silent, and only the sound of Supreme Bloodwave tapping on the armrest could be heard. Bloodwave, if Qiulong is really as the Shadow Guard said and is the Dragon Clan member who lost his divine ruler realm when he failed to seize the throne, then it will be a little difficult to deal with. It's not like you don't know that the Dragon Clan has its own rules. The members of the Dragon Clan can only be killed by the Dragon Clan. Otherwise, the Emperor God of the Great Void Temple would not have just sealed him and not killed him after he committed such a sin in the Great Void Temple. Supreme Giant Axe frowned as he spoke. The ruler Bloodwave's face was expressionless when he heard this. He indifferently replied, "So what if he's a member of the Dragon Clan? He has already been expelled from the Dragon Clan because of the Great Taboo. He is no longer a member of the Dragon Clan. He is now just a stray dog." After a pause, the Bloodwave Supreme continued, "Furthermore, the incident on the ancient Path of Stars was not planned by the Dragon Clan. I am not looking for the Dragon Clan. I am looking for the Great Void Temple." Supreme Giant Axe pondered for a moment, but a decisive look flashed in his eyes. He then laughed heartily and said, "Fine. Then I'll go crazy for Jian Wushuang. What's wrong with that?" He said it was difficult, not impossible. He, Giant Axe, had never been someone to be afraid of. The ruler Bloodwave chuckled upon seeing this. It had been many years since he and his old friend had fought side by side. This time, the two of them would probably start a massacre again. "All right, then we will go to the Great Void Temple now and seek justice for Wushuang." The ruler Bloodwave laughed and stood up, preparing to leave the Divine Life Palace. Supreme Giant Axe's eyes narrowed, and killing intent began to condense as he stood up. Just as the two of them were about to leave the Divine Life Palace, a disciple of the Divine Life Palace quickly rushed over. "My lords, please hold on. Supreme Martial Artist Guy Fu has some words for me to pass to you." Supreme Bloodwave and Supreme Giant Axe frowned upon hearing this. Could it be that Supreme Fu was going to stop them? "What do you mean?" the ruler Bloodwave said indifferently. The disciple of the Divine Life Palace quickly said, "My lords, Supreme Martial Artist Guy Fu said that he won't stop you from leaving the Divine Life Palace this time. He won't ask what you want to do, but you can't use the Divine Life Palace's banner. Everything you do will be based on your personal preferences and has nothing to do with the Divine Life Palace." The Bloodwave Supreme and the Supreme Giant Axe exchanged a smile. They naturally understood what this meant. "All right," he said. The two of them nodded. The Bloodwave Supreme seemed to have recalled something and instructed, "By the way, regarding Jian Wushuang's death, just like before, you can't reveal any information to his cultivation partner, understand?" "Yes." The disciple of the Divine Life Palace cupped his hands and replied. The Bloodwave Supreme and the Supreme Giant Axe did not hesitate any longer. They looked up at the sky and reappeared thousands of miles away. The Divine Life Palace was located in the shrine where the Supreme was located. Supreme Martial Artist Guy Fu sat cross-legged on a yin-yang futon, surrounded by a few exquisite incense burners. Wisps of mind-cleansing smoke rose from the incense burners and dispersed in the air, turning into a thin mist. "Little fellow, this is all I can do for you." An old voice came out of his mouth. Time continued to flow, and 5,000 years passed in the blink of an eye. As the Bloodwave Supreme and Supreme Giant Axe fought their way to the Great Void Temple, the entire universe was filled with the smell of smoke. And on the ancient Starry Sky Road, in the 10th city, in the 9th level of the God Refining Tower, Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged in the chaotic void with his eyes closed and his brows furrowed. At this moment, he did not know where he was, nor did he know how much time had passed. He only knew that he had fallen into the long river of time, and his life of hundreds of thousands of years had begun to reflect. In the long river of time, he was looking for the original heart that he had long lost. Why did he cultivate? Why did he practice the sword? Jian Wushuang wanted to give him an answer. In the long river of time, he saw his own youth wielding a sword, saw his own high spirits, saw his own desperate counterattacks, saw his own ups and downs. After a long time, Jian Wushuang suddenly opened his eyes, like a divine dragon that had just woken up from a deep sleep or a lightning bolt that streaked across the night sky. Jian Wushuang's eyes suddenly shot out 3 inches of divine light. He had found his original heart. His original intention was to rebel. Even in the face of endless darkness, he could still split it open with a sword and see the light again without fear. Even if the heavens wanted to suppress him, he would split the heavens. Even if the earth wanted to stop him, he would crush the earth and face death with equanimity. Even if they were deep in the swamp, they had to move forward with heavy weights. They gritted their teeth and persevered, never giving up. This was Jian Wushuang's defiance. However, as Jian Wushuang's strength continued to improve, an Ai's name continued to shake the universe. Jian Wushuang could not find it. However, it had never gone far. It was just stored in a place that Jian Wushuang had forgotten, quietly waiting for Jian Wushuang to come. And now, Jian Wushuang had finally found it. "I'm sorry to have kept you waiting," Jian Wushuang muttered to himself, and then looked up at the 2 words, heart observation. Bang! The 2 words, heart observation, were broken. In an instant, the countless origin rules on the 9th floor surged toward Jian Wushuang wave after wave. Under the dense origin rules, Jian Wushuang's broken divine body recovered quickly. His exhausted divine power was also replenished at an extremely fast speed. Jian Wushuang quietly absorbed the most primitive aura of rules and started to break through to the ultimate ruler realm. He believed that once he broke through to the ultimate ruler realm, he would be able to shock the heavens when he came out of seclusion. As Jian Wushuang began to break through to the ultimate ruler realm, a great battle between the Supremes broke out in the universe. The Blood Wave Supreme and the Supreme Giant Axe both charged into the Great Void Temple. The might of a supreme martial artist was simply unstoppable. Furthermore, Blood Wave Supreme and Supreme Giant Axe were the top Supremes in the universe. The moment the 2 of them attacked, they swept across the entire Great Void Galaxy. Other than Supreme Bing Yi and a few of the top-ranked Hall Masters on the Ancient Path of Stars, the other 4 Hall Masters of the Great Void Temple also attacked and killed the Blood Wave Master and the Giant Axe Master. This battle was simply earth-shattering. Countless stars and galaxies were shattered, and countless star domains were flattened. The starry sky near the Great Void Star Domain was even shattered. Countless disciples of the Great Void Temple had died at the hands of the Blood Wave Master and the Giant Axe Master. This battle lasted for several years and finally ended with the defeat of the 4 Palace Masters. When this news came out, the entire universe was shocked and dumbfounded. Only now did everyone realize how terrifying the Divine Life Palace, which had been silent for dozens of chaos cycles, could be once enraged. At this moment, at the entrance of the Temple of Life, the Blood Wave Supreme was expressionless, and his robes were stained with the supreme divine blood. His blood-red hair fluttered in the wind, and countless disciples of the Great Void Temple trembled as they watched from afar. As for the Supreme Giant Axe, he had transformed into a towering giant with an axe in his hand. He was like an ancient god who had split the heavens and earth apart. A terrifying aura that could shake the 9 heavens and 10 lands and crush the ancient times emanated from his divine body. The 4 Hall Masters were all injured as they stood guard outside the Great Void Temple. Their expressions were extremely ugly. Bloodwave, Giant Axe, you want to start a war between the Great Void Temple and the Divine Life Palace just for Jian Wushuang? A silver-haired young man strode out from the Great Void Temple. His face was ashen and the coldness in his eyes was enough to freeze the stars. It was Supreme Bing Yi. Binji, when you sent Qiu Long to kill Jian Wushuang, a disciple of the Divine Palace, did you ever think of starting a war? The Blood Wave Supreme said indifferently with his hands behind his back. His expression did not change at the sight of Supreme Bing Yi. Supreme Bing Yi sneered and replied, I'm just giving him a taste of his own medicine. Back then, Jian Wushuang could kill my disciple in the Taro ruins. Now, I can naturally send someone to kill him. Could it be that, in this world, only Jian Wushuang killed my people and my people can't kill him? This is ridiculous. The ruler Blood Wave narrowed his eyes and looked at him indifferently. He raised his eyebrows and replied, "So what if I am? You?" Supreme Bingyi was so angry that he laughed and replied, "Blood Wave, don't go too far." Supreme Blood Wave replied indifferently, "So what if I'm bullying you today?" When Supreme Bingyi heard this, he immediately burst into laughter. "So what if you're bullying me?" After laughing, he suddenly lowered his head and looked at the ruler Blood Wave. His eyes were extremely cold as he said, "Blood Wave, it seems like we can only fight." As soon as he finished speaking, an earth-shattering aura erupted from Supreme Bingyi. This aura was extremely powerful. It was as if he could crush the firmament with a stretch of his hand and crush the universe with a step. The might of a supreme martial artist was truly terrifying. "All right, I heard that you are the new Emperor God of the Great Void Temple. I would like to see how powerful you are." The ruler Blood Wave replied indifferently. "Then come." Supreme Bingyi snorted coldly. With a stomp of his right foot, he instantly disappeared from the Great Void Temple and headed toward a remote part of the universe. The ruler Blood Wave's expression was calm as he similarly chased after Supreme Bingyi. Both of them were top-tier supreme beings in the universe. Once they fought, the surrounding star fields would be destroyed. Therefore, they had to find a remote place in the universe. Supreme Bing, Emperor God Bingyi. The faces of the other four palace masters changed. Just as they were about to give chase, they saw the supreme giant axe stomp down, and a terrifying axe light streaked across in front of them. With a cold expression, he said, "As long as I'm here, no one is allowed to interfere with their battle." Just as the Blood Wave Supreme and the Supreme Giant Axe were about to attack the Great Void Temple, a similarly shocking piece of news spread from the Supreme Ancient Path of Stars. The 9th Kulpa King had killed 2 Deputy Hall Masters of the Great Void Temple in succession on the ancient Sovereign Road of Stars. The 7th Palace's Deputy Palace Master, White Float, and the 5th Palace's Deputy Palace Master, Qing Yuan, had both died at the hands of the 9th Kulpa King. The entire universe was once again in shock. Although the 7th Vice Palace Lord Whitefloat and the 5th Vice Palace Lord Xianxia were both ordinary autarchs, they had broken through to the autarch god level dozens of chaos cycles ago. Their qualifications and foundations were unfathomable. However, these 2 supreme martial artists had been killed by the 9th Kulpa King alone. What kind of terrifying battle record was this? Autarchs were incredibly precious in the universe, and it was likely that no autarch would ever perish in a single chaos cycle. However, including Supreme Dingguang, more than 3 Supremes had died at the hands of the 9th Kulpa King. When this news was spread, the universe was shocked and countless people were terrified. The 9th Kulpa King's impressive battle achievements were shocking. At this moment on the ancient path of stars, in a wild plain, the white-haired and white-robed 9th Kulpa King had an indifferent expression as he walked with his hands behind his back. He was naturally aware of the praises that the universe was giving him. However, his expression did not change much, as if he had done something insignificant. Whether it was praise in front of others or ridicule in the shadows, he had heard far too many of them in the past 100 chaos cycles. He had long since become completely unmoved by them. He had experienced too many ups and downs in his life. When he was still a mortal, Supreme Master Gai Fu had brought him back to the Divine Life Palace from a remote and desolate star field. He had then tested him for a rare perfect chaotic life form. The entire Divine Palace had cheered for him and regarded him as the successor of the Divine Life Palace's Palace Master. He had been stuck at the Omega Sovereign level for dozens of chaos cycles, and countless people had mocked him behind his back for having reached the end of his potential and for being a fallen genius. Even Autarch Gai Fu, who he had viewed as his master, had found it hard to conceal his disappointment. In the end, he broke through to the Supreme Being realm and killed 3 great Supremes in a row, causing a stir in the universe. His Tao heart had long been tempered to be extremely calm. Whoosh! Just as the 9th Kulpa King's thoughts were like a tide, suddenly, an old man wearing a cloak, holding a black cane, and with the word Great Void embroidered on the back, landed in front of him. Ninth Culpa King. The old man looked at him indifferently and blocked his way. What? The Ninth Culpa King stopped, squinted his eyes, and looked at the old man with the crutch. The black cloak was a divine robe that only the Hall Master of the Great Void Temple, who was a high-level supreme martial artist, was qualified to wear. Let me introduce myself. I am Feng Nan, the Hall Master of the Fifth Hall of the Great Void Temple. I reached the Divine Ruler Realm 130 Chaos Cycles ago. The ruler Green Phoenix you killed was my Deputy Hall Master. The South River Supreme Martial Artist said indifferently. Oh, what's the matter? The Ninth Culpa King looked at him and said calmly. You killed my Vice Hall Master. Why do you think I'm looking for you? A hint of playfulness flashed in the eyes of the South River Supreme Martial Artist. You want to kill me? Upon hearing this, the corners of the Ninth Culpa King's mouth gradually curled up, forming an arc that was not a smile. That's right, but I'm not in a hurry to kill you. I have something to ask you first. The South Region Supreme Martial Artist nodded, then shook his head and said, Ninth Culpa King, do you know that the entire universe is in chaos now? Your Divine Life Palace's Supreme Blood Wave and Supreme Gai Fu have already attacked the Great Void Temple. The so-called incident is because of Jian Wushuang's death. This is not difficult for me to understand. After all, as far as I know, Jian Wushuang was brought to the Divine Life Palace by Supreme Blood Wave. He can be considered half a disciple of Supreme Blood Wave, and Supreme Giant Axe is a close friend of Supreme Blood Wave. After a pause, the South River Supreme Martial Artist looked at the Ninth Culpa King's face and said, But what I don't understand is that, as far as I know, you are arrogant and cold by nature. You don't have a good relationship with Jian Wushuang either. They even had a battle in the trial field of the Divine Life Palace. That battle ended with your defeat and you lost all your face in the Divine Life Palace. With your character, you won't make enemies for him, right? Upon hearing this, the Ninth Culpa King smiled faintly. You're right. I don't really like Jian Wushuang. He's my biggest opponent in history. Hearing this, a look of doubt appeared on the face of the South River Supreme Martial Artist. He said, Then you still? Without waiting for him to finish, the Ninth Culpa King turned to him and said calmly, But a person with slow talent like you won't understand. A true opponent is so rare and valuable. Oh? Is this the appreciation between geniuses? A look of contemplation flashed in the eyes of the South River Supreme Martial Artist. Then, the corners of his mouth curled up into a cruel arc. He turned his head and said, All right, I've got what I wanted to know. Ninth Culpa King, you've killed 2 Vice Hall Masters of my Great Void Temple in a row. Prepare to die now. After he finished speaking, the South River Supreme Martial Artist lightly tapped the ground with the walking stick in his hand. In an instant, a huge map of the galaxy appeared at the spot where the walking stick of the Xuanan Supreme Being was pointed. As for the figure of the South River Supreme Martial Artist, he slowly disappeared. In the sky, countless stars were hanging, the moon was splashing the galaxy, and the sun was slowly rising, hanging on both sides of the sky. On the ground, countless mountains rose from the ground, and great rivers flowed without end, full of vitality. The entire wilderness instantly transformed into a world of its own. Ninth Culpa King, watch closely. This is my supreme divine art. In this place, this Lord is the heavenly Tao. If this Lord wants you to die, you can't live. If this Lord wants you to live, you can't die. The words of the South River Supreme Martial Artist resounded in the heavens and earth at the same time. It was like the voice of the heavens, deafening even the deaf. It was as if at that moment, the South River Great Master was the embodiment of the heavenly Tao that controlled the power of heaven and earth. A heavenly Tao technique? The Ninth Culpa King raised his head and looked at the sky. Then, a sneer appeared on his face. The heavens decide, not me. I make the decision, not the heavens. Boom. Ian. A divine kingdom. An ambush had begun. 3 days had passed since the battle between the Blood Wave Supreme and the Ice Brilliance Supreme in the Great Void Temple, while the Ninth Culpa King was engaged in battle. No one knew the outcome of this battle. Everyone was waiting to see who would emerge victorious between the Bingyi and the Great Master Bloodwave. One was the former First Hall Master of the Great Void Temple, a new Emperor God of the Great Void. The other was the first seat of the Divine Life Palace, a special life form with ancient qualifications. However, no matter what the outcome of the battle was, everyone had reached a consensus in their hearts. The disciples of the Divine Life Palace should not be humiliated. At this moment, in a galaxy far away from the Great Void Temple, Supreme Bingyi stood in midair with an icy peak divine sword in his hand. His silver hair and silver brows were covered in frost. Under his feet, countless wisps of ice spread out and actually froze the entire starry sky. Under the power of this ice, countless stars and galaxies were frozen and stopped rotating, forming an extremely shocking scene. The ruler Bloodwave was expressionless as he stood with his hands behind his back. Traces of dark red blood dripped from his body, melting the ice beneath his feet. No matter how strong the wind is, I will not move. Bloodwave, what do you want? Do you really want to fight to the death with this seat? Supreme Bing Ye's face was gloomy as he coldly spoke. The two of them had been fighting for 3 days. In terms of offensive power, he was slightly stronger than the ruler Bloodwave. Unfortunately, the ruler Bloodwave was a special life form, and in terms of ruler divine power, he was much stronger than the ruler Bloodwave. No matter how hard the ruler Bloodwave attacked, he was unable to defeat him. Now that the grand ceremony of all races in the universe was about to begin, he, Bingyi, was very likely to become one of the Tao listening children under that lord. He did not want to continue fighting with the Bloodwave Supreme. The ruler Bloodwave's expression was indifferent as he replied, I don't want to do anything. What I want is to seek justice for the disciples of the Divine Life Palace. Justice? Don't tell me you want me to apologize on Jian Wushuang's behalf. Supreme Bingyi looked as if he had heard a joke, and a mocking look appeared on his face. However, the ruler Bloodwave nodded and replied, Yes, that's exactly the case. Hearing this, the sneer on Supreme Bing Ye's face gradually disappeared. His eyes turned cold as he coldly said, Bloodwave, you're too naive. Who do you think I am? What was Jian Wushuang's identity? Is he even worthy? From the beginning to the end, Supreme Bingyi had never thought that Supreme Bloodwave would start a war with him over a mere Jian Wushuang, regardless of the overall situation. After all, in his opinion, those who had not become Supremes were still ants. It would not affect the overall situation if he killed Jian Wushuang. The ruler Bloodwave shook his head and said, Whether he's worthy or not is not for you to decide. All right, Bloodwave, since you want to die, don't blame me. Supreme Bing Ye's eyes turned cold. He could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. A sharp ice dragon that was tens of thousands of feet long rose from the ground and swept toward the ruler Bloodwave with a roar. The void shattered instantly. Humph! The ruler Bloodwave's eyes narrowed as he snorted coldly. A vast amount of blood condensed at his fingertips, forming a light wave that shot toward the frost dragon. Just as the two of them were about to fight again, two deep and ancient voices sounded in their minds. You guys, have you had enough? All right, Bloodwave, stop. The eyes of both the Bloodwave Supreme and the Brilliance Ice flickered when they heard this voice. Sir Divine Emperor, Autarch Gaifu. Just as Jian Wushuang's death created a storm that swept across the entire universe, on the ancient path of stars, within the God-refining tower of the 10th city, Jian Wushuang's breakthrough had also reached a critical point. Countless auras of the origin laws became chaotic and violent. Like the rising tide of the sea, they swept toward Jian Wushuang in waves. The 9th rule was gradually forming in his body. Jian Wushuang's eyes were wide open as he continued to absorb the origin rules like a whale sucking in water. At that moment, if someone was on the 9th level of the God-refining tower, they would realize that in the chaotic 9th level, a huge whirlpool had formed with Jian Wushuang as the center. Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged in the center of the whirlpool. He absorbed the surging divine power and formed the 9th rule in his body. With the formation of the 9th rule, Jian Wushuang's aura became more and more powerful and terrifying. He was gradually stepping into a completely new realm. In fact, there was indeed such a person who was quietly watching Jian Wushuang. Outside the God-refining tower, Lord Blue stood with her hands behind her back. Only her beautiful eyes that were like autumn water were exposed. It was as if she had passed through the God-refining tower and seen Jian Wushuang, who was trying to break through to the ultimate ruler realm. Images of Jian Wushuang flashed in the depths of her eyes and were recorded. Her face flashed with splendor as she muttered to herself, "He's a good seedling." Time flew by and 60 years had passed in the blink of an eye. Outside the universe, even though the battle between Supreme Bing Yi and Supreme Bloodwave had ended, a barrier had naturally formed between the Great Void Temple and the Divine Life Palace. The people from the two forces kept clashing with each other. On the ancient path of stars, the winds and clouds were also changing. The 9 overlords no longer existed. On the ancient path of stars, only Qiulong was left. Most of the ultimate rulers in the last 8 cities had already become Qiulong's subordinates. Only the overlord, the 9 stars Saint Sun, and the young clan leader of the demonic Luo clan joined forces to resist Qiulong. However, the situation was not good. They were chased around by the other powerful figures under Qiulong like stray dogs and could only struggle bitterly. Even if the 3 of them joined forces, the situation was still precarious. Of the overlord's 6 great commanders, some had died, and some had surrendered. Only Commander Mountain Shaker and Commander Hanfeng were still alive. Even Maluo's subordinate, Maluo Yengu, who had fought with Jian Wushuang before, had died in the back 8 cities at the hands of the young emperor of the Great Sun Divine Kingdom. Just as the 3 of them began to feel despair and wondered if they should join Qiulong's side, no one knew that within the God-refining tower's 10th city, ultimate ruler, done. Jian Wushuang, who was surrounded by countless origin rules, suddenly opened his eyes. A ray of divine light that shocked the world flashed across his eyes. His divine body made a series of cracking sounds. As if he had become an immortal, Jian Wushuang had reached the realm of completion with the integration of the 9th rule. Be it the strength of his divine power or his divine body, Jian Wushuang could feel that he had become unprecedentedly powerful. Compared to a ruler of the 5th level, Jian Wushuang's power had increased by at least 100 times. At that moment, he was far from what he had been when he was a stage 5 great emperor. The current me, how strong are they? Jian Wushuang opened his palm and looked down. He muttered to himself, "I don't even know how strong I am now." Jian Wushuang took a deep breath. He was in no hurry to leave the 9th level of the God-refining tower. Instead, a look of deep thought flashed across his eyes. Right now, I've already reached the ultimate ruler realm. Why don't I try to push the Eternal Night sword art to the minor success realm in one go? I can also try to grasp the tarot sword and comprehend the second move of the tarot sword manual. Dawn. Jian Wushuang immediately put his thoughts into action. With a flip of his right hand, the tarot sword manual, which exuded an ancient aura, suddenly appeared in front of him. He flipped to the second page of the tarot sword manual, and the introduction to daybreak immediately appeared in his mind. When night fell and the world fell into endless darkness and suffering, the first beam of light that cut through everything in the deepest darkness. It was called the light of dawn daybreak. Boom! The world in front of Jian Wushuang suddenly changed. In the endless dark night, a beam of golden light shot over from a distance. At first, this golden light was only as thick as a strand of hair, but when it reached its destination, it became an unrivaled force and turned into a golden sword light that shot up to the sky, tearing the endless dark night apart. The entire world was split into 2. Endless light shone down, and the world returned to chaos. Daybreak. It's an invincible killing move that can eliminate all evil and darkness in the world. Jian Wushuang muttered to himself, and a flash of understanding appeared in his eyes. Daybreak was a variant killer move of Eternal Night. If Eternal Night was said to be a sword that formed a country, a move that combined trapping and killing enemies into one, then Dawn was the most powerful killing divine art that gathered all divine power. In terms of pure offensive power, Daybreak's offensive power was far greater than Eternal Night's. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and closed the tarot sword manual. He continued to deduce the sword move Eternal Night and tried to push it to the initial realm. Time flowed by and another 5,000 years passed. The ancient path of stars was in a state of chaos, but in the back 8 cities, Qiulong's reputation was already at its peak, and no one dared to disobey his orders. The Overlord and the others were gradually losing their breath under the suppression of the dragon prison. They could only retreat in defeat. The Overlord, the 9 Stars Saint Sun, and the young clan leader of the Maluo clan had no choice but to act separately to prevent Qiulong from seizing the opportunity to capture them all. At this moment, at the entrance of the 11th city, the great Overlord was covered in blood as he panted heavily, his eyes fixed on the first prince and Scarlet Sun Demon Master. In the past, the 3 of them had been part of the 9 great leaders of the ancient path of stars. However, with the rise of Qiulong, the first prince, the Scarlet Sun Demon Master, and the others had joined him. He, the great Overlord, had become a stray dog, while these 2 had become Qiulong's thugs. The first prince and the Scarlet Sun Demonic Lord both had faint smiles on their faces as they looked at the great Overlord, who was at the end of his rope. Overlord, a wise bird chooses a tree to perch on. Now that Lord Qiulong is very powerful, I'll give you a kind reminder since we were polite before. Quickly join Lord Qiulong's army. This is the only clear path for you. The Overlord's expression was cold. He had activated the immortal Overlord body to its limit, but even so, his breath had been exhausted to the extreme. If it were not for the fact that the immortal Overlord body was an extremely strong physique rarely seen in the ancient times, he would have been unable to hold on and died at the hands of the 2. I, the great Overlord, have always been indomitable. I've never been submissive to anyone. He's not qualified to make me submit to Qiulong. The Overlord's eyes were cold as he said proudly. Even though he was covered in wounds, his back was still straight, like a spear that would not fall. He was the Overlord and had been undefeated throughout his life. He had suppressed the last 8 cities on the ancient path of stars. How could he be willing to be under someone else? Stupid stubbornness. The first prince shook his head, his eyes cold and sharp. If that's the case, then Overlord, you should be prepared to go. Scarlet Sun Demon Master, do it. As soon as he finished speaking, he flipped his right hand, and a dragon-patterned jade seal appeared in his hand. Then, he pressed it toward the Overlord. Brahma seal suppress. This jade seal was extremely domineering. The moment the jade seal pressed down, it was as if a mighty emperor had appeared. His mouth contained the wrath of the heavens, and he descended with the wrath of thunder. He shook the world and punished the world. The Scarlet Sun Demon Master's eyes flashed as well. He pulled with his hands, and a black ball covered in black demonic fire appeared, pressing down on the Overlord's head. The 2 of them were the strongest of the unparalleled rulers, and their attacks were so earth-shattering that the earth began to crack. Seeing this, the Overlord squinted his eyes, and a hint of solemnness flashed through them. In terms of combat strength, he believed that he was not inferior to either of these 2, and he could even kill either of them. But now, his indestructible tyrant body had long been overwhelmed by the long-term pursuit, and he was afraid that he would not be able to continue fighting. Bang! Finally, the joint attack of the first prince and the Scarlet Sun Demon Master bluted heavily on where the great Overlord was standing, and the 11th city trembled. In the 11th city, countless ultimate rulers hid in their palaces and trembled as they watched the scene. Where is he? The first prince raised an eyebrow and let out a soft gasp. Where the Overlord was standing, there was no one. The Overlord's figure had disappeared. First prince, this is the connecting passage between the 10th and 11th cities. I think the Overlord has already escaped to the 10th city. The Scarlet Sun Demon Master said slowly. The first prince's eyes narrowed and a cold smile appeared on his lips. He said coldly, "You want to escape? Let's go." Bang! The 2 of them took a step forward and disappeared at the entrance of the 11th city. At the entrance to the 10th city, the Overlord opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of divine blood. His face turned pale. Just now, he had activated the passage scroll in time and dodged the joint attack of the First Prince and the Scarlet Sun Demon Master. But even so, he was still grazed a few times, and the scars on the undying tyrant body increased. Humph. When I recover, I'll definitely turn these two into ashes. The Overlord's expression was gloomy as he said hatefully. He was one of the strongest among the 9 magnates. He did not think that the First Prince and the Scarlet Sun Demon Master, who he usually looked down on, would be able to force him into such a situation with the power of the imprisoned dragon. We can't continue like this. Otherwise, we'll probably die today. The Overlord took a deep breath, and his expression gradually calmed down. A thoughtful look flashed in his eyes. He understood that he only had 2 choices if he wanted to live. The other option was to submit to Qiulong like the First Prince and the others, and become his subordinates. The other option was to completely leave the ancient path of stars. At that time, he would be free to fly in the sky and swim in the sea, and the First Prince and the others would definitely not come after him. The first choice was directly rejected by the Overlord. If he wanted to surrender to Qiulong, he would have surrendered a long time ago, and things would not have ended up like this. If the second option was to leave the ancient path of stars, he would be very unwilling. Once he left the ancient path of stars, it would mean that everything he had done before would be for naught. He would be completely disqualified from the universe myriad race gathering. Something's wrong. I still have a third option. Just as the Overlord was deep in thought, he suddenly saw a Liu-shaped pagoda from the corner of his eye, and his face lit up. That's right. I can escape to the God-refining tower first. At the thought of this, the Overlord no longer hesitated and flew toward the God-refining tower. As soon as the Overlord left, the First Prince and the Scarlet Sun Demon Master appeared at the entrance of the passage. First Prince, where do you think the Overlord will run to? The Scarlet Sun Demon Master asked with a frown. The First Prince narrowed his eyes when he heard that. He then pointed at the God-refining tower and said with a smile that was not a smile, "If this Highness guess is correct, he should have gone to the God-refining tower." With that, the 2 of them turned into 2 rays of light and shot toward the God-refining tower. In the 10th city, many ultimate rulers looked up at this scene, and they were shocked. The 3 magnates had arrived in the 10th city at the same time. God-refining tower, 9th level. The originally dense and surging origin source law aura had almost completely dissipated. All that was left was a black-robed, black-haired statue that seemed to have existed since ancient times. It sat cross-legged in the void, and waves of extremely powerful aura spread out from it, sweeping in all directions and squeezing the entire chaotic space of the 9th floor. After 50 years, I finally reached the initial stage of the Eternal Night Sword technique. A deep voice came from the black-robed, black-haired sculpture. In the next moment, the statue suddenly opened its eyes. An earth-shattering and extremely sharp divine light flashed through the eyes of the statue. He was Jian Wushuang. In the close to 10,000 years that he had spent in the God-refining tower, not only had he broken through to the realm of an ultimate ruler and grasped the second move of the Zenith Sword Cannon, Daybreak, he had even deduced the Eternal Night Sword move to the small success realm. The current him, one sword could be a world. The sword fell, and Eternal Night descended. And this was far from his greatest improvement. The Tarot Divine Sword. Jian Wushuang lowered his head, and saw a dark golden sword full of mysterious runes floating in front of his knees. There was a closed vertical eye on the hilt of the sword. Then, he opened his palm, and his 5 well-defined fingers grabbed the hilt of the Tarot Divine Sword. In an instant, Jian Wushuang felt as if his heart and blood were connected. Pucci, the eye on the hilt of the Tarot Divine Sword suddenly opened. An extremely evil aura was emitted from the vertical eye. The vertical eye was covered in cobweb-like blood vessels. The black eyeball was spinning, and it was filled with a sinister feeling. Even though I can only use a trace of the Tarot Divine Sword's true power, it's enough. Jian Wushuang smiled, and a look of satisfaction flashed in his eyes. The Tarot Divine Sword was the peerless divine weapon that Tarot Supreme had used to dominate the universe. In terms of grade, it was far beyond the level of a Law Supreme treasure. It had reached a level that Jian Wushuang could not understand. Even if he could only use a trace of its power, it would surpass all of Jian Wushuang's current sword principal superpowers. Jian Wushuang flipped his hand and put the Tarot Divine sword back into the sandalwood sword case on his back. Then he slowly stood up. Kachuk. His divine body made crackling sounds like beans being fried. Qiu Long, don't let me down, Jian Wushuang muttered to himself in a cold voice. Outside the God-refining tower. Just as the Overlord arrived and was about to step into the God-refining tower. Whoosh! 2 rays of light pierced through the heaven and earth from the distance. They were a step ahead of him and landed at the entrance of the God-refining tower. As the light gradually dissipated, the first prince stood in front of the God-refining tower with his hands behind his back. The corners of his lips curled up in a mocking smile as he said, "The great Overlord has actually fallen to the point where he needs to escape into the God-refining tower to save his life?" The Overlord's expression changed as he turned around to look. Scarlet Sun Demon Master was expressionless, and he blocked his way with a long black saber in his hand. Seeing this, the Overlord's heart sank, and his face turned ugly. In the 10th city, the many ultimate rulers saw this and could not help but sigh. Fate makes fools of people, and heroes meet their end. A powerful being at the level of a big shot has actually fallen to the point of being hunted down. It seems like we can't stay on the ancient path of stars any longer. They naturally knew about the changes that happened in the last 8 cities. Qiu Long had killed those who disobeyed him, which was true to the saying, "Those who follow me live, and those who resist me die." In the last 8 cities, apart from those who had submitted to Qiu Long, the other ultimate rulers had basically been killed. Fortunately, they were weak and Qiu Long did not care about them, so no one came to find trouble with them. He did not know if he should be glad or smile bitterly. Let's hurry up and leave. When the big shots fight, I'm afraid we'll be caught in the crossfire. After sighing, these ultimate rulers all soared into the sky, planning to leave. When the first prince and the others saw this, they did not care. They were just a bunch of small fries, and they did not care to deal with them. Overlord, just surrender. The first prince's gaze turned and finally locked onto the Overlord. A majestic aura rose with him as the center, and the terrifying pressure directly crushed all the houses within a 10-mile radius. Behind the great Overlord, the Scarlet Sun Demon Master twisted his neck and released his own pressure, as if an ancient demonic god had descended. The Overlord took a deep breath and knew that there was no way to end this peacefully. Fortunately, he had a fierce and ambitious personality. A look of determination flashed in his eyes as he said in a deep voice, "Then come! All right, I'll fulfill your wish." The first prince licked the corner of his lips, a sickly cruelty on his face. Just as he and the Scarlet Sun Demon Master were about to attack and kill the great Overlord with one strike, all of a sudden, rumble, as if the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. The entire 10th city, a region of nearly 100,000 miles, started to tremble. At this moment, the ground cracked and the sky changed colors. Gusts of wind howled, and the entire 10th city seemed to have fallen into a raging sea. An extremely powerful pressure descended with a bang, threatening all directions. In front of this pressure, the first prince's and Scarlet Sun Demon Master's pressure was like a stream in a mountain facing an ocean. They were so insignificant that they were on completely different levels. In just a breath, he was crushed. "What's going on?" The first prince and the Scarlet Sun Demon Master exclaimed in shock. Even the Overlord was shocked. He, who had the immortal Overlord body, felt like a little chick shivering in front of this destructive pressure. Only at the fortress where Lord Blue of the 10th city was located, she, who had been resting with her eyes closed, opened them. A smile appeared on her face as she said softly, "He's finally out." Bang! At this moment, the God-refining tower's bronze door that had been sealed for close to 10,000 years suddenly shattered. Countless dragon-like sword chi shot out from it. Who's causing trouble? The first prince and the Scarlet Sun Demon Master roared, as they used their divine power to block the sword chi. Boom! 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 However, When the dragon-like sword Qi hit them, they were sent flying hundreds of meters away, leaving countless deep sword marks on the ground. The first prince and Scarlet Sun Demon Master were both shocked and furious as they glared at the God-refining tower. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. A heavy sound of footsteps came from the God-refining tower. Following that, they saw a cold-looking young man dressed in black with his jet-black hair hanging down loosely. He was carrying a sword case on his back as he walked out from the darkness of the God-refining tower. Who is he? When the grave-looking young man walked out of the darkness of the God-refining tower, the first prince and Scarlet Sun Demon Master trembled in disbelief. Even the Overlord was dumbfounded. It was as if he had been struck by lightning. Jian Wushuang. When Jian Wushuang walked out of the God-refining tower, the entire 10th city fell silent. Not only were the first prince, the Scarlet Sun Demon Master, and the Overlord dumbfounded, but even the many ultimate rulers who were planning to leave the ancient path of stars were so shocked that their eyes almost fell out of their sockets. They looked at Jian Wushuang in a daze. The next moment, the first prince and the others shuddered and stared at Jian Wushuang. The first prince even shouted in a low voice, "Impossible! There's no way you're still alive. I saw you being killed by Qiu Long with my own eyes. How can you still be alive? Who are you? Speak. Who the hell are you?" Jian Wushuang looked at him indifferently and said, "Are you very unhappy to see me alive?" The first prince gritted his teeth. Speaking of which, he and Jian Wushuang had some history. Back then, in the Taro ruins, his third brother, the third prince, had been killed by Jian Wushuang. Although the eldest prince was happy that the third prince had been killed, he pretended to be heartbroken. He even said that he would take Jian Wushuang's head personally to offer it to the third prince's spirit in heaven. Later, when Jian Wushuang killed the Golden Crow Prince, the Rabbit Buddha, and the other 4 unparalleled rulers on the ancient path of stars, he knew that he was no longer Jian Wushuang's opponent. He no longer mentioned that he would take the third prince's head. Things should have ended here. However, at that moment, Qiu Long came out and Jian Wushuang died. The first prince took this opportunity to announce to the public that Jian Wushuang was lucky. Otherwise, he would have died in his hands. What he did not expect was that not only was Jian Wushuang not dead, but judging from his momentum, he was even stronger than before. Now that Jian Wushuang had been reborn, once Jian Wushuang found out, he would spread the news that he had been clamoring outside. "Jian Wushuang, don't be too pleased with yourself. If Lord Qiu Long can kill you once, he can kill you twice." The first prince's expression was dark as he clenched his fists. Scarlet Sun Demon Master looked at Jian Wushuang with interest. This was the first time he had seen the man who had killed 4 invincible rulers. Blood Sword. "Oh no, I should call you Jian Wushuang. I've always wanted to see how strong you are." Scarlet Sun Demon Master took a step forward, looked at Jian Wushuang, and said with a smile. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. He remembered that he had never mentioned his name on the ancient path of stars. He had been using the alias of Blood Sword. "It seems that while I was in seclusion, a lot of things must have happened in the universe." Jian Wushuang thought for a moment, then looked at Scarlet Sun Demon Master and said, "You want to fight me? Not bad." The Scarlet Sun Demon Master replied with a laugh. At the same time, he had a plan in his heart. Now that Jian Wushuang had died and come back to life, it would definitely cause a great uproar in the universe. If he killed Jian Wushuang, he would not only gain Qiu Long's appreciation, but he would also become famous in the universe. Even if he was no match for Jian Wushuang, he believed that he could escape with his strength. When the time came, he would report the news to Qiu Long and it would be a great merit. "Then I'll do as you wish." Jian Wushuang nodded and his 5 well-defined fingers grabbed the hilt of the Wuxia divine sword at his waist. Seeing this, the Overlord's expression changed and he quickly shouted, "Jian Wushuang, don't be reckless. When I recover, we'll join forces." Bang! Before he could finish, Jian Wushuang had already drawn his sword. Wuxia divine sword was unsheathed 3 inches. Clang! A light ring. The next moment, a sword light that made the world wail flashed. "Hurry up." It was too fast. The crowd only saw Jian Wushuang pull out his sword, and then a white sword light shot out from his scabbard and cut through Scarlet Sun Demon Master's body like a knife cutting through tofu. The smile on the Scarlet Sun Demon Master's face had not frozen yet, and he only managed to utter a single word before his body was torn into pieces. Boom! In the next moment, Scarlet Sun Demon Master's divine body collapsed. One-hit kill. At this moment, the world seemed to be suffocating. Everyone looked at Jian Wushuang in shock. Their eyes were dazed and their mouths were so wide open that an egg could be stuffed in. Just now, what was happening? Jian Wushuang's expression was calm and his black hair was loose, as if he had just done something insignificant. He looked at the first prince and said calmly, "Do you also want to fight me?" Pucci. The first prince's eyes widened. When he heard the question, his face was filled with shock as if he had seen a ghost. His legs went soft and he almost fell to the ground. One-shot kill? The first prince felt a chill run down his spine to the top of his head, his entire body cold. Jian Wushuang, how did he become so terrifying? Gulp. The sound of someone's throat moving was heard. Everyone in the 10th city swallowed their saliva unconsciously. They looked at Jian Wushuang, who wore a calm expression and had black hair. All the hair on their bodies stood on end. The Scarlet Sun Demon Master was a famous and unparalleled ruler in the universe. He was one of the 9 great overlords of the ancient path of stars, an existence that countless people looked up to. However, such an unrivaled ruler had been killed by Jian Wushuang with one stroke. This was not the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was that the divine sword on Jian Wushuang's waist seemed to have not been completely unsheathed. What kind of terrifying combat strength was this? At this moment, countless people were terrified. Jian Wushuang, don't be too pleased with yourself. No matter how strong you are, Lord Qiulong on the ancient path of stars can still deal with you. The first prince gritted his teeth. He was not stupid. Since Jian Wushuang could kill Scarlet Sun Demon Master with one strike, he must be much stronger than him. The only thing he could do now was to use Qiulong to make Jian Wushuang hesitate. You want to use the dragon prison to suppress me? Jian Wushuang looked at him and said indifferently, Crown Prince, I didn't want to kill you. But since you've brought up Qiulong, I'm sorry, but you can't leave today. When the first prince heard this, his expression changed greatly. As he stealthily retreated, he opened his mouth and chided, Jian Wushuang, do you think that you can fight against Lord Qiulong just because you have come back to life? Let me tell you, Lord Qiulong's strength is far beyond your... Bang! At this point, the first prince saw that the distance between him and Jian Wushuang had increased. He stepped heavily with his right foot and immediately shot toward the entrance of the 10th city. Escape! He had to escape. I said, you can't leave. At this moment, a calm voice sounded in his ear. When did you come over? How could he be so fast? The first prince's scalp went numb. The next second, a half-moon sword energy slashed across his body. The first prince's divine body was sliced through like paper by the half-moon sword light. No! The first prince roared in shock. His divine body suddenly shattered. The first prince and the Scarlet Sun Demon Master were both dead. Who? Gusts of cold wind blew across the top of the 10th city. The noisy 10th city was suddenly so silent that one could hear a pin drop. Everyone's eyes widened and they looked at Jian Wushuang in shock. The first prince and the Scarlet Sun Demon Master had both been killed by a single sword strike. It was wrong. They did not even see Jian Wushuang unsheath his Wuxia divine sword. With just a sword-drawing move, the 2 divine bodies were annihilated. That was too terrifying. Cold sweat broke out on the foreheads of countless people as they looked at Jian Wushuang, who was standing in the void like a sword god descending from the heavens. They all thought of the same thing. It was as if a demonic seed had descended from the heavens. He was truly a Tai-Sui god in the mortal world. Even the overlord swallowed his saliva and looked at Jian Wushuang with a complicated expression. In the past, Jian Wushuang had been the 7th commander under him, a nobody on the ancient path of stars. But now, the entire universe was stirring up a storm for him. His life was even saved by him just now. Blood sword. the overlord called out softly. Compared to Jian Wushuang, he was more used to using the alias Bloodsword. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and stepped down in the void. He said, "Where is Qiulong now?" Hearing this, the overlord was stunned. He immediately replied, "Bloodsword, he's in the 18th city." Before he could say anything else, Jian Wushuang had already turned around and walked toward the entrance of the 10th city. A calm voice was heard. "Let's go. Follow me to kill him." Hearing this, the overlord's body trembled and he quickly followed. A moment later, the two of them disappeared from the entrance of the 10th city. The surrounding ultimate rulers of the 10th city finally woke up from their dream. They looked at each other and could see the splendor in each other's eyes. They knew that the ancient path of stars was about to change. Then, the news that Jian Wushuang had killed the first prince and Scarlet Sun Demon Master, with one move spread like wildfire across the universe. In an instant, the entire universe shook. Within the Great Void Temple, Supreme Bingyi was sitting in the main hall with his eyes closed. He had spent nearly 100 chaos cycles building up the power of the ruler blood wave, and he had used up almost all of it. It would take him countless years to recuperate. "Blood wave. I'll settle this with you at the Universe Myriad Clan gathering." Supreme Bingyi opened his eyes, and killing intent flickered in his silver pupils. It was unknown how many years it had been, but ever since he had reached the divine ruler realm, no one had dared to provoke him. However, that day, when Bloodwave went on a killing spree in front of the Great Void Temple, he even said, "So what if I bully you?" He did not lose any face at all. How could he not be angry? Originally, when he became the new Emperor God, it was time for him to show his might. But now, the entire universe was laughing at him, saying that he was the most useless Emperor God out of all the previous Emperor Gods in the Great Void Temple. His killing intent toward the ruler Bloodwave had almost materialized. Suddenly, at this moment, a long cry for an audience came from outside the door. "Come in." Taking a deep breath, Supreme Bingyi suppressed his emotions and spoke calmly. "Yes." Then a ruler of the Great Void Temple hurried in. "Greetings, Emperor God Bingyi." The ruler half knelt and cupped his hands. Supreme Bingyi nodded his head and said indifferently, "What is the so-called audience for?" The ruler half knelt on the ground. His head lowered as he struggled and hesitated. Speak." Supreme Bingyi frowned as he rebuked in a dignified manner. The disciple gritted his teeth and replied, "Sir Divine Emperor, there's news from the ancient path of stars that Jian Wushuang isn't dead. He's been reborn and killed the first prince, Scarlet Sun Demon Master, and the others with one strike." After he said that, there was no thunderous anger or murderous intent in the entire hall. Instead, it turned into a dead silence. The deathly silence was chilling. The disciple's expression could not help but turn fearful. Only after a long while did Supreme Bing Ye's calm voice resounded in the main hall. "This Lord knows you may leave." Hearing this, the disciple heaved a sigh of relief and quickly took his leave. What he did not know was that Supreme Master Bing Ye's throne, which was made of supreme-grade divine materials, had already been shattered into pieces. Trash! Supreme Bing Ye's expression was ashen to the extreme. A cold aura spread out from him, causing the temperature of the entire hall to drop by thousands of degrees, and the ground to be covered with a thick layer of frost. If Jian Wushuang did not die, then the Great Void Temple would become the biggest joke in the entire universe. At the same time, in the Divine Life Palace, the Blood Wave Supreme and the Supreme Giant Axe had also received the news of Jian Wushuang's rebirth. "Ha ha ha ha! I knew it. This little fellow has always been tough. How could he die at the hands of a stray dog?" The Blood Wave Supreme, who had not smiled since Jian Wushuang's death, laughed heartily. Supreme Giant Axe looked at the Blood Wave Supreme, who was laughing heartily, and a smile also appeared on his face. He was not good with words, but when he heard that Jian Wushuang was still alive, he was just as happy as the Blood Wave Master. "Blood Wave. The Great Void Temple has suffered a huge loss this time." Supreme Giant Axe laughed and shook his head. "On the ancient path of stars, The ninth Culpa King's figure flashed rapidly as he chased after an old man from Daqin. Didn't you want to kill me to avenge your vice palace master? The ninth Culpa King's expression was indifferent, and he gave a calm smile as he chased. Pervert. A monster. You're crazy. The old man gritted his teeth and his face was filled with fear as he continued to fly forward. This person was the River South Palace Master who had come to kill the ninth Culpa King. It was just that they did not know when, but the two of them had changed their identities between hunting and being hunted. The autarchs of special life from the Divine Life Palace are far superior to us ordinary autarchs, especially when the ninth Culpa King has a perfect life form. The thoughts of the South River Supreme Martial Artist spun rapidly in his mind. He began to frantically plan how to escape from the pursuit. However, at this moment, the ninth Culpa King, who was originally chasing him, suddenly stopped in his tracks. Oh? Jian Wushuang didn't die. The ninth Culpa King clasped his hands behind his back, a look of surprise on his face. He had just received a message from the Bloodwave Master, telling him that not only was Jian Wushuang not dead, but he had also killed the first prince and the Scarlet Sun Demon Master with one stroke. That's true. He's someone I, the ninth Culpa King, acknowledge as my opponent. How could he die? The ninth Culpa King shook his head and smiled. He looked at Hall Master Feng Nan and said indifferently, Fine. I'll spare your life today. At the same time, Jian Wushuang and the Overlord had already stepped into the 11th city. Blood Sword Jian Wushuang, listen to me. If I'm not wrong, Qiulong should have already known that you're not dead. Now, the entire back 8 city is under his command. If you break in rashly, he will definitely set up an ambush and send people to kill you. In my opinion, why don't we find the 9 Stars Saint Sun and the young clan leader of the Maluo clan first, and then we can think of a plan to deal with Qiulong together. Otherwise, if you enter the last 8 cities like this, you will definitely make enemies with the whole world. The Overlord followed Jian Wushuang, slightly behind him, and said carefully. The current Jian Wushuang naturally could not be treated with the same attitude as before. Even when he spoke, he had to think twice to see if it was appropriate. Enemies of the whole world? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and then shook his head. He said calmly, Then, let's make the whole world our enemy. In the depths of the ancient path of stars in the 18th city, Qiulong sat on a throne. The young emperor of the great Sun Divine Kingdom, the blood god, and a woman with an enchanting figure and charming looks stood on his sides. He was holding a brief message in his hand. It was an urgent battle report from the ruler of the 10th city. The letter recorded in detail how Jian Wushuang had been reborn and how he had killed the first prince and the Scarlet Sun Demon Master with one stroke. My lord, what should we do now? The young emperor lowered his head and asked. Qiulong had a playful expression on his face. He did not reply, but smiled and said, This is interesting. Jian Wushuang was killed by me, but he still came back to life. He paused. Qiulong's eyes swept across the young emperor of Great Sun Divine Kingdom and the enchanting woman. He said, Young Flame, All-Heaven Woman, each of you will lead 100 ultimate rulers to the 11th city and kill Jian Wushuang. Yes, the young emperor of the Great Sun Divine Kingdom agreed, while the heavenly woman kissed Qiulong on the cheek and said with a charming smile, Lord Qiulong, wait for my good news. A moment later, the two of them led 100 ultimate rulers each and flew toward the 11th city. Looking at the two disappearing figures, Qiulong chuckled and said, Jian Wushuang, don't worry. The game between us has just begun. The 11th city. The sky was gray. Jian Wushuang walked on the imperial road of the 11th city. He could feel that after nearly 10,000 years, the ancient path of stars had become much more deserted than when he was there. He remembered that when he had first entered the 11th city, there had been many ultimate rulers guarding the passage, inviting the ultimate rulers of the next 8 cities to join their factions. But now, all the liveliness and prosperity of the past had disappeared, leaving behind only a bleak and cold atmosphere. Jian Wushuang, ever since you faked your death, the last 8 cities of the ancient path of stars have fallen into Qiulong's crazed slaughter. Now, the last 8 cities of the ancient path of stars are either dead or have fled. Even if there are a few who are still alive, almost all of them have submitted to Qiulong. The overlord, who was behind Jian Wushuang, sighed. Back then, when the 9 of them ruled the ancient path of stars together, it could be said that hundreds of flowers bloomed, each of them shining with extraordinary splendor. Even if there were occasional killings, their foundations would not be hurt. Jian Wushuang nodded and did not reply. The overlord continued, I've already sent a message to the 9 stars Saint Sun and the demon race's young clan leader. They'll come and find us soon, and we'll fight Qiulong together. Jian Wushuang hummed and asked after some thought, Is Commander Mountain Shaker still alive? He did not care about the life and death of the others. However, Commander Mountain Shaker had treated him well when he had first arrived at the 8 cities behind the ancient path of stars. The overlord smiled bitterly and replied, Mountain Shaker is still alive, but the other commanders are all dead. It's just a pity that we couldn't even take care of ourselves when we were being chased by Qiulong, so we could only scatter and flee. I don't know where Mountain Shaker is hiding now. Just as the 2 of them were discussing, a rumbling sound suddenly came from the sky. Jian Wushuang looked up. An evil-looking man wearing a royal robe embroidered with a blazing sun and a seductive woman in revealing clothes with an alluring figure were leading 100 ultimate rulers each. They were like rolling black clouds as they strode over from the distance. Their momentum was extremely great, and they were like a black mass. It was as if heavenly soldiers and generals had arrived, and they were full of oppression. It's the young emperor of the great Sun Divine Kingdom and the heavenly spider woman. The overlord's pupils shrank. He did not expect that Qiulong would be so fast. They had just arrived at the 11th city and he had already sent people to intercept them. In the sky, the young emperor of the great Sun Divine Kingdom looked down at Jian Wushuang with a cold expression. Back in the Taro ruins, Lord Jinan had died at the hands of Jian Wushuang. The Duke of the South was the trusted assistant he had sent to the Taro ruins. Humph! I'll take advantage of today to end Jian Wushuang. The young empress snorted in her heart. The heavenly woman stared at Jian Wushuang. After making a sound of surprise, she covered her mouth and laughed. TSK. TSK. You are Jian Wushuang? You're younger and more handsome than I thought. Why don't you be one of my thousands of male companions? Perhaps I can even persuade Lord Qiulong to spare your life. After she finished speaking, she burst out laughing. It had to be said that the Tianluo woman was extremely beautiful, and her smile was so charming that even the many ultimate rulers behind her were mesmerized. The overlord quickly said to Jian Wushuang, don't listen to this demoness nonsense. The Sky Spider clan is the best at bewitching. Once they bewitch someone, they will swallow their divine power and soul to nourish themselves. When the Shura woman heard this, a burst of anger appeared on her face and she rebuked, Overlord, don't you dare get injured here and slander me. Then, she turned to Jian Wushuang and smiled. Jian Wushuang, have you thought it through? Jian Wushuang was expressionless. He slowly raised his head to look at her and said calmly, Are you done? What? The heavenly alluring woman's face froze. If you're done, then prepare to die. Jian Wushuang's eyes were cold. He patted the Wuxia divine sword with his right hand and the Wuxia divine sword was instantly unsheathed. Bang! An earth-shaking, ice-cold sword essence that shot up to the 9 heavens and sent chills down one's spine instantly spread out. This sword essence was like a hurricane, surging with endless power. The entire 100 miles of space instantly froze. Jian Wushuang, come back quickly. We can't fight such. Super battle formation. The overlord shouted. However, before he could finish his sentence, Jian Wushuang had already grasped the hilt of his sword. He took a heavy step and soared into the sky, becoming one with his sword. He turned into a half-moon sword light and rushed toward the sea of ultimate rulers. This sword was extremely ordinary at the start, but as it got closer, it suddenly seemed to seize the good fortune of heaven and earth and gave off endless brilliance. The young emperor and the heavenly woman's faces were cold as they shouted, Attack with all your might and kill him! Yes! Yes! The 200 ultimate rulers responded. All sorts of nomological treasures appeared, and they lit up the sky with the glow of countless spells. The young emperor pulled with his hands and a huge blood sun was formed. Then it pressed down on Jian Wushuang. Secret skill, violent blood sun. The alluring heavenly woman's eyes narrowed, and she spat out thousands of spider silk at Jian Wushuang. The spider silk was extremely tough and was covered with purple venom. It was like a heavy javelin, breaking the sound barrier. At that moment, thousands of spell techniques rained down. As for Jian Wushuang, he had already arrived on his sword and crashed into the black mass of ultimate rulers. At this moment, the sword had the power to tear the sky apart and penetrate the world. It glowed with dazzling light, and as if it were slicing through butter, it cut through all of the techniques, crushing the 200 ultimate rulers. In the firmament, only this sword light was left. Boom! 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 The mountains shook, the sun and the moon collapsed, and chaos boiled. With earth-shaking explosions, countless divine bodies collapsed and countless ultimate rulers fell. It was as if a rain of blood had fallen from the sky. It was unstoppable. It was as easy as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. One sword could break all techniques. The sword pierced through the young emperor's blood sun at an extremely fast speed. Then, under the young emperor's disbelieving gaze, he was cut in two. How could he be so powerful? The alluring and beautiful heavenly woman's expression changed drastically. She was horrified, and with a sharp scream, she transformed into a huge black spider with black legs. She quickly weaved a net in the air, trying to block the bright sword light that Jian Wushuang had turned into by combining with his body. However, it was all useless. Jian Wushuang easily tore apart the net she had painstakingly woven, crushed her body, and split her into two. This was the first move that Jian Wushuang had made after he came out of seclusion cultivation. It was destined to shock the world. Far away from the 11th city, two people were rapidly approaching. The two of them were the 9 Stars Saint Sun and the young clan leader of the Maluo clan, Huang Mo. Suddenly, the two of them stopped in their tracks as if they had seen something unbelievable. They raised their heads and looked at the horizon. At the end of the horizon, a bright sword radiance connected the heaven and earth like a heavenly river and crashed into a black cloud. It directly cut the black cloud that was formed by divine arts and spells into two, splitting the sea and passing by. What a terrifying sword intent! The 9 Stars Saint Sun and Maluo Huang Mo looked at each other, their eyes filled with shock. Run! The Overlord sent me a message earlier that he was with Jian Wushuang. If I'm not wrong, this sword essence should be Jian Wushuang. In other words, they have already started fighting with Qiulong's men. The 9 Stars Saint took a deep breath and couldn't help but exclaim. Maluo Huang Mo nodded heavily. Then they did not dare to delay any longer. They took a step forward and turned into 2 rays of light, flying toward Jian Wushuang at an even faster speed. Walala! The sword chi soared through the sky and cut through the sun and moon. Between heaven and earth, light returned. A spectacular scene appeared. The young emperor of the great sun divine kingdom, the heavenly woman, and the 200 ultimate rulers had been reduced to sand like fortresses on a beach. They had all been annihilated. With a single strike, the young emperor of the great sun divine kingdom, the heavenly woman, and 200 ultimate rulers had all been annihilated. In the 11th city, some ultimate rulers who survived in the cracks looked up at the sword as if they had seen a legend. Their lips trembled as they said, "The sword god has descended, unparalleled in the world. The elegance of this sword is proof of invincibility in the world. I've been reborn, and I've killed all my enemies with a single sword strike. Ha 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 ha. Our ancient path of stars is saved." Countless people were looking at Jian Wushuang with fascination and fascination. The Overlord also looked at Jian Wushuang. He had originally wanted to help Jian Wushuang, but he slowly lowered his arm. He looked at Jian Wushuang, who had killed all the enemies in the world with one stroke, and a brilliant smile bloomed on his face. The smile was so carefree and hearty. He knew that it was time for Qiulong's retribution. Whoosh! Whoosh! Two rays of light landed beside him and turned into the 9 stars Saint Sun and Maluo Huang Mo. The two of them did not speak. They just looked at the sword light that Jian Wushuang had turned into, and their expressions were extremely complicated. Once upon a time, they were the 9 magnates, while Jian Wushuang was just a nobody on the ancient path of stars. But now they could only look up to Jian Wushuang. I'm far from him, the 9 stars Saint sighed. A moment later, Jian Wushuang was the only one left in the sky. He stood with his sword in hand, his black hair flying in the wind, and his black robe was stained with divine blood. It was as if he was stepping on the sky. You guys wait for me here. Jian Wushuang looked back at them, then turned into a sword light and flew toward the entrance of the 11th city. Jian Wushuang, where are you going? The overlord and the others shuddered and shouted. Dragon slaying. Jian Wushuang said calmly. Boom! A towering sword light appeared and disappeared before their eyes in an instant. It reappeared thousands of miles away. In the next moment, Jian Wushuang had disappeared from the 11th city. The overlord and the others looked at each other and quickly followed. The 11th city, the 12th city, the 13th city, the 14th city. Jian Wushuang's stroke stretched for thousands of miles. Starting from the 11th city, it swept across the sky of various cities. He saw the last 8 cities which had been reduced to ruins. Countless mountains had been broken, and countless lakes had evaporated. He knew that this was all the work of Qiu Long. In the last 8 cities, countless ultimate rulers who were struggling at death's door under Qiu Long's hands raised their heads and looked at the dazzling sword light that swept across the sky. Jian Wushuang. He has returned. In the 16th city, a burly figure hiding deep underground felt the powerful sword way aura that quickly passed through the sky. His body trembled and he hurriedly broke out of the ground. He was Commander Mountain Shaker. He knew that the day he had been waiting for so long had finally arrived. At this moment, they were in the 18th city, the last city on the ancient path of stars. Qiu Long sat on a throne with dragon patterns. As if he had sensed something, he slowly raised his head to look at the sky, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a strange arc. As expected, you didn't stop him? He stretched his neck lazily, making a cracking sound. Blood god Jian Wushuang is about to arrive. Bring his old friend out. The scion's eyes narrowed, and he nodded in agreement. He took a step forward and walked into the palace behind Qiu Long. Then he pushed out a huge object that was covered in a black robe. Whoosh! The clone lifted his black robe, revealing a chubby ultimate ruler on a huge stone shelf made of black iron. 2 black chains had pierced through his shoulder blades and nailed him to the stone shelf. This ultimate ruler was, shockingly, Hao Jin. Little fellow, the person who will save you is coming. Qiu Long laughed at him and then turned his head to look at the horizon. He licked the corner of his mouth with his tongue and revealed a cruel look. A ray of light appeared in the sky. This light was like a bolt of lightning between heaven and earth, splitting the sky into 2. It carried the power of endless thunder and quickly swept over. The light grew faster and faster until it suddenly enlarged in Qiu Long's eyes. It was a sword ray. The sword light came as fast as lightning. It was not obvious at first, but as it got closer, it instantly covered the sky and ground, tearing the clouds into pieces. The blood god's expression turned cold. Even though he was still 1,000 miles away, he could already feel the sharp sword chi scraping his divine body. So powerful, the scion thought to himself. It's finally here. On the other hand, Qiu Long's eyes flickered with excitement as he stood up from his throne. Bang! The sword light that Jian Wushuang had turned into did not have any intention of stopping and charged straight at Qiu Long. Ha ha ha! Good! Qiu Long stomped heavily on the void and created 2 big pits. His body turned into a black light and collided with Jian Wushuang. Bang! A loud bang exploded. At the center of their collision, a massive shockwave spread out, creating white waves in the air. In the next moment, Qiu Long's figure was seen flying backward and crashing into a mountain, causing the mountain to collapse. The sword light gradually dissipated, revealing a thin figure in black. He was Jian Wushuang, who had conquered 18 cities with one sword. The stroke had accumulated Jian Wushuang's endless divine power. It kept on accumulating and only exploded when it hit Qiu Long. Cough, cough, cough. Jian Wushuang, you've broken through to the level of ultimate ruler. Qiu Long walked out of the mountain and wiped the divine blood from the corner of his mouth. He looked up at Jian Wushuang without any fear on his face. Instead, his eyes were full of excitement. Not bad. Thanks to you, I've broken through. Jian Wushuang nodded lightly. Qiu Long laughed and said, That's good too. It'll only be interesting if I kill you again like this. Jian Wushuang ignored him. Instead, he turned to look at Ruler Hao Jin with a pained look in his eyes. 2 chains had pierced through Ruler Hao Jin's shoulder blades. His face was sallow, and he was extremely weak. His eyes were filled with decay. However, when he saw Jian Wushuang, his hopeless eyes gradually lit up. He looked at Jian Wushuang and opened his mouth with difficulty. He forced a smile and said, Lord Bloodsword, I knew you would come to save me. When Qiu Long saw this, he let out a sinister laugh and said mischievously, Jian Wushuang, speaking of which, this guy who followed you is really loyal. For the past 10,000 years, I have crushed his bones again and again. Every day, I have burned his divine soul with divine fire, causing his divine body to collapse and regenerate continuously. In the end, even so, he is still unwilling to rely on me. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang's expression gradually turned cold. He turned to look at him and said calmly, Don't worry. I will also crush every bone in your body inch by inch, pull out your tendons and strip your bones, and torture you day and night. Ha ha ha, Jian Wushuang. Let's see if you have the ability to do so. Ha 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 ha. Qiu Long laughed arrogantly and countless black chains surged out from behind him, flying toward Jian Wushuang like missiles. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. He had a deep impression of the black chains. Each of them was as heavy as Mount Tai. Jian Wushuang had been helpless against this move and could only take a beating. But now the situation was different. Looking at the thousands of chains that were coming at him, Jian Wushuang said 2 words. Sundering stars. Whoosh! A silver sword rainbow condensed in Jian Wushuang's hand like thousands of lights in the world. With the power of thousands of troops, it slashed at the thousands of chains. As Jian Wushuang broke through to the ultimate ruler realm, the star-slashing sword also had a world-shaking difference. The star-slashing sword actually formed countless illusionary stars. The silver sword rainbow was more like a magnificent galaxy. When the sword smashed down, it was as if it had absorbed a surging galaxy. The power was terrifying to the extreme. Ding! A series of crisp explosions rang out as the powerful black chains were shattered one by one at an extremely fast speed by the silver sword rainbow. It did not stop there. After the silver sword rainbow cut through the countless black chains, it continued forward. Under the surprised gaze of Qiu Long, the sword slashed his body. Bang! Qiu Long smashed down, and a sword mark appeared on his divine body, spurting out black divine blood. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and stomped heavily on the ground with his right foot. Suddenly, like a hurricane, he leaped and appeared above Qiu Long's head. Before Qiu Long could react, Jian Wushuang stretched out his fingers and grabbed his face. Then, he smashed Qiu Long's face onto the ground. Qiu Long, you deserve to die. Bang! The ground cracked open and Jian Wushuang's expression was cold. He grabbed Qiu Long's face and smashed it into the ground continuously. His actions were extremely violent. Boom! 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 Again and again. Waves of terrifying sword essence exploded in Jian Wushuang's hands. Jian Wushuang grabbed Qiu Long's head and smashed it into the ground of the 18th city, creating a huge pit. Countless cracks spread out from the pit. Jian Wushuang, who gave you the right to hurt me? A low and ferocious voice came out of Qiu Long's mouth. Taking advantage of the gap, Qiu Long stretched out his hand and pushed Jian Wushuang hard. In an instant, an extremely strong pushing force rushed toward Jian Wushuang. It was as if heaven and earth were rejecting him and pushing Jian Wushuang away. In the next moment, Qiu Long's hands were on the ground, and he pulled his head out of the deep pit. He looked extremely miserable. His face was covered with divine blood. Jian Wushuang's sword essence kept exploding between his fingers, covering his face with sword marks. Hoochie hoochie hoochie. Qiu Long panted heavily, but there was no fear on his face. Instead, he licked the divine blood on the corner of his mouth and said with a deep and ferocious smile, "Is this the feeling of being injured? I'm getting more and more excited." Bang! Before he could finish his words, he had already stepped on his right foot and shot out like a cannonball. His right hand formed a fist and once again smashed toward Jian Wushuang. Pitch-black dragon scales began to cover his arm. The entire void became distorted because of this punch. Jian Wushuang's expression was cold. He slashed his right hand on the Wuxia divine sword and also raised his sword to attack Qiu Long. The speed of the two was extremely fast, and they exchanged thousands of moves in an instant. They fought from the ground to the 9 heavens, and then from the 9 heavens to the ground. Every time the two of them clashed, the void trembled continuously. The 18 cities seemed to have fallen into an apocalyptic disaster. The stars shifted and the divine lands sank within a radius of 1,000,000 miles. Is this still a battle between ultimate rulers? When the scion of the blood god saw this, a look of shock flashed across his face. Just by standing at the edge of the battle between Jian Wushuang and Qiu Long, he could feel the violent pressure from the two of them, forcing him to step back. Jian Wushuang, die, 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 die. Qiu Long sneered and his eyes were filled with excitement. His mouth suddenly split open, revealing 2 rows of cold teeth, and he bit down on Jian Wushuang. Boom! At this moment, Qiu Long seemed to have transformed into a huge black dragon, exuding endless dragon might. A stinky gust of wind came out of Qiu Long's mouth. Jian Wushuang's eyes glowed with divine light, and he slashed out several sword lights of sky opening, forcing back Qiu Long's huge mouth. Qiu Long roared in pain. His white pupils twisted, and he laughed. Jian Wushuang, is this your strength after your breakthrough? I don't think so. He stretched out his palm from a distance and his 5 fingers were slightly bent as if he was going to grab Jian Wushuang. Absolute gravity. As his voice fell, it was as if the entire world had fallen into the hands of Qiu Long, turning into a country that solely belonged to him. Boom! 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 Qiu Long slowly clenched his fingers. In an instant, countless mountains and lakes were moved and pressed toward Jian Wushuang. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang's pupils could not help but shrink slightly. 10,000 years ago, he had died because of this spell. This time, the spell reappeared and the pressure was much stronger than when it killed Jian Wushuang last time. It was as if the entire heaven and earth were targeting Jian Wushuang. The violent power of heaven and earth was about to crush Jian Wushuang into meat paste. Is it similar to the heavenly Tao technique of the one-thought divine kingdom? Jian Wushuang's mind was racing. He could feel that the surrounding void had turned into a realm that belonged to Qiu Long. Under this pressure, he felt as if his legs were made of molten iron, becoming extremely heavy. Even moving a step was extremely difficult. Ha ha ha, Jian Wushuang, this is the realm technique that I comprehended when I was still in the supreme divine realm. Feel it well. Ha 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 ha. Qiu Long laughed wildly as his eyes flickered with excitement. Whoosh! Whoosh! At this moment, several beams of light flew over from the distance. The conveyance light landed and turned into the Overlord, the 9-star Saint, and the others. Commander Mountain Shaker was also among them. Oh no, Jian Wushuang's condition is not good. We have to help him quickly. The Overlord's face changed and he was about to help Jian Wushuang. It's rumored that Qiu Long was at the Divine Ruler realm back then. However, he lost the fight for the position of the Dragon Clan's crown prince and was stripped of his Divine Ruler realm, falling to the Ultimate Ruler realm and being exiled from the Dragon Clan. Although Jian Wushuang is strong, he's still a little lacking when compared to a former supreme. The 9 stars Saint Sun and Maluo Huang Mo looked at each other. Their expressions were also extremely grave. Just as the 3 of them were about to join forces to block Qiu Long 1 and 2 for Jian Wushuang, Commander Mountain Shaker looked at Jian Wushuang and said in a deep voice, Lord Overlord, Lord Saint Sun, Lord Young Clan Leader, please believe in Jian Wushuang. This is his own battle. I think he doesn't want others to interfere. But the Overlord frowned and was about to say something. Commander Mountain Shaker smiled and said, Overlord, please believe in Jian Wushuang. I know him. He is a man who can create miracles. Hearing this, the Overlord was stunned. He was about to step out, but he slowly retracted his foot. Mountain Shaker, you're right. This is a battle that belongs to him. Facing the heavy gravity, Jian Wushuang took a deep breath. He had to admit that Qiulong was the strongest ultimate ruler he had ever met. Even the 9th Kulpa King, when he was in the realm of ultimate ruler, gave him less pressure than the current Qiulong. Of course, this was also because the 9th Kulpa King had never really made a move on him. If Jian Wushuang had not broken through to the ultimate ruler realm, he might have really died today. However, the current Jian Wushuang was invincible in the ultimate ruler realm. Divine body appear, Jian Wushuang said indifferently. In an instant, Jian Wushuang's divine body started to expand. Streaks of immortal radiance surrounded him, and countless nebulas rose from his feet. A power that came from the deepest part of his soul exploded. 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, 50,000 miles, 60,000 miles, 70,000 miles. In the blink of an eye, Jian Wushuang had turned into a chaos giant that was 70,000 miles tall, with his head touching the sky and his feet stepping on the ground. He regarded the sun as a pellet and the galaxy as a bathtub. It was as if he could break the universe with a raise of his hand and sink the divine lands with a step. However, this was not the end. His divine body was still expanding. 80,000 miles, 90,000 miles. It only stopped growing when Jian Wushuang's divine body grew to 98,000 miles. At this moment, Jian Wushuang's face was covered by the endless celestial brilliance nebula, and it was hard to see clearly. He looked like a demon god in the chaos and a celestial king from the ancient times. With every breath he took, there was a rumbling thunder and a space storm. Under Jian Wushuang's divine body, which was 98,000 miles long, the heavy pressure was insignificant. It was like a thin rope trying to tie up a mammoth's. It did not affect him at all. The next moment, Jian Wushuang said calmly, Eternal night. Whoosh! The Wuxia divine sword instantly disappeared and turned into countless black mist that was as thick as ink. Surging toward Qiulong, time and space seemed to have stopped at this moment. What is this? Ha! Qiulong was not surprised by Jian Wushuang's divine body. As one of the most powerful races in the universe and the successor of the Dragon Clan, he had seen and heard a lot. He naturally knew that special creatures could activate divine bodies. However, the black mist that was constantly surging toward him made him a little confused. These wisps of black mist were clearly visible but not tangible. However, no matter how he blasted out his Abhijna in an attempt to destroy the black mist that was constantly surging over, the Abhijna that was enough to destroy the heavens and earth would just pass through the black mist. The next moment, the black mist attacked him directly, intertwining and gathering to form a pitch-black ball that enveloped him. In the blink of an eye, the world in front of him had changed dramatically. Jian Wushuang and the 18th city had disappeared. Everything he could feel and see had turned into the deepest eternal darkness. A force of deprivation slowly crept into his body, as if a pair of hands in the darkness had begun to take away everything that belonged to him. His cultivation base, his power, his lifespan, and even, it was the bloodline of his dragon clan. Under this force of deprivation, his aura gradually began to weaken. At this moment, even the outside world could feel that Qiulong's life aura was gradually weakening. Is Qiulong finally going to die? Just as smiles appeared on everyone's faces and they were celebrating, Jian Wushuang's face, which was shrouded by countless celestial brilliance and nebulas and high up in the 9 heavens, was expressionless. He could feel a terrifying aura that could shake the heavens and earth and make all races submit to it. It was gradually rising in the eternal night kingdom. It was the purest aura of the dragon race. A giant dragon was beginning to truly awaken, The sound of glass shattering came from the black ball, and cracks gradually appeared on the surface of the black ball. A terrifying aura that could not be described with words gradually rose. What's going on? This aura. It's the aura of the dragon clan. Dragon might. This is the purest dragon might of the dragon clan. The overlord, the 9 stars Saint Sun. And the other smiles had yet to fade when they suddenly froze on their faces and were all replaced by horror. Bang! Finally, after a loud explosion, Jian Wushuang's eternal night kingdom suddenly shattered. A pitch-black dragon that was tens of thousands of feet long, as large as a mountain range, soared into the sky. The dragon was covered in palm-sized scales that glowed with a dark luster. Black clouds swirled around its 5 claws, and its 2 horns were forked like sharp swords that could pierce through the sky. Whoosh! The Wuxia divine sword flew back and was held in Jian Wushuang's hand. The sword trembled. Jian Wushuang was expressionless as he raised his head to look at the black dragon. The dragon race was one of the strongest races in the universe. They were born at the principal's master realm and had an innate bloodline suppression when facing people from other races. Jian Wushuang, you are the first person to force me to use my original form. You should be proud. Qiulong's eyes were cold as he twisted his huge body in the clouds and said to Jian Wushuang coldly. After saying that, Qiulong stepped on the void with his 5 claws and suddenly hit Jian Wushuang. The speed of this collision was extremely fast, and a terrifying explosion sound was produced in the void. Jian Wushuang twisted his neck and stretched out his hand that covered the sky. His 5 mountain-like fingers formed a fist and he punched at Qiulong. Qiulong and Jian Wushuang, one was 100,000 feet long and the other was 98,000 miles tall. After the collision, the entire 18th city shook violently as if it had fallen into a catastrophe. Countless palaces and buildings collapsed, and the earth split open. In an instant, the entire 18th city seemed to turn into chaos. Violent divine power and pressure spread out without restraint, destroying everything in sight. He's too strong. This is still a battle between ultimate rulers? We're all ultimate rulers, but we don't even have the right to interfere in this battle. The overlord, the 9 stars saint, and the others all raised their heads to look at this scene and were shocked. Even the blood god was dumbfounded. As one of the 9 overlords, the top heaven's favorites in the universe, they were all at the peak of the ruler realm. However, at this moment they were all shocked. The battle between Jian Wushuang and Qiulong was far beyond their understanding. The words comparable to a supreme martial artist appeared in their minds. Although Jian Wushuang and Qiulong were still at the ultimate ruler realm, they definitely had the power of a supreme. One was a dragon that had fallen from the supreme divine level, while the other was a special life form that was a perfect chaotic life form. Such a battle was simply rare in the world. Bang, bang, bang. Jian Wushuang and Qiulong kept clashing with each other in the sky. Each time they clashed, there would be a huge blast. If they were not fighting on the ancient path of stars but in the universe, the entire star area would have been destroyed. Jian Wushuang, you will die today. Qiulong roared ferociously, and his 5 claws, which were like 5 sharp divine swords, cut through the sky and grabbed at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's eyes were also filled with killing intent. He knew that only one of them would survive today. Qiulong, you are the one who will die today. Jian Wushuang grabbed by Shan with his backhand. He lifted a mountain with his 5 fingers and smashed it at the head of the Qiulong with surging divine power. As the two exchanged blows, they both retreated several steps. With every step they took, the 18th city trembled violently as if an earthquake was triggered. The buildings in the 18th city had all disappeared. Millions of miles of land were in ruins. Innate divine ability. Dragon's might. Roar. Qiulong opened his mouth and roared. In an instant, a mighty pressure from the depths of his bloodline descended. The dragon race was also known as the leader of all races. They had an innate suppression over all the other races in the universe. Under this pressure, even the overlord, the 9 stars saint, and the others, who were far away, felt like they were going to kneel down and bow to Qiulong. Is this the might of the dragon clan? The pupils of the overlord and the others contracted. Jian Wushuang snorted and said, "Innate divine ability, life intimidation." A power that came from the deepest part of his soul suddenly spread out with Jian Wushuang as the center. This was also the power of pressure. Under this pressure, time and space seemed to have frozen. In the next moment, the pressure of the dragon clan from Qiulong and the pressure from Jian Wushuang's perfect chaotic life form suddenly collided. Although these two pressures were invisible, they seemed to have condensed into a physical form at this time. They turned into two opposing auras, constantly pressing and colliding. Pong, pong, pong. In the void, there was an unpleasant sound of friction. Then, everyone saw that the pressure of the dragon clan that belonged to Qiulong was being pushed back by Jian Wushuang's pressure. No matter how strong the dragon was, how could it suppress a perfect chaotic creature? Under the intimidation of Jian Wushuang's life force, Qiulong felt for the first time that the bloodline in his body was submissive. It was the look of a higher life form looking down on a lower life form. "Qiulong, I told you, you're the one who's going to die today," Jian Wushuang said indifferently. As soon as he finished speaking, Jian Wushuang took a step forward and grabbed Qiulong's tail with his two hands. Then, he smashed Qiulong's tail in the most primitive and brutal way. The 10,000 Zhonglong Qiulong was like a mudfish in Jian Wushuang's hand. He had no power to resist at all. Along with Qiulong's angry roar, a burst of golden dragon blood sprayed from the sky. When everyone saw this scene, they could not help but be dumbfounded. Jian Wushuang. Qiulong let out a deafening roar, and with a violent shake, he broke free from Jian Wushuang's hands. Then he stomped on the ground with his 5 claws and pulled away from Jian Wushuang. He stared at Jian Wushuang with his huge eyes. There were no other emotions in his eyes, only madness and ruthlessness. Secret skill, pillar of fire dragon, breath of destruction. Qiulong let out a low roar, opened his mouth and spat out boiling lava. The lava was terrifying to the extreme. Just a drop of fire was enough to burn a bottomless pit in the ground. At the same time, in the 10th city where Lady Blue was, Lady Blue, dressed in blue and wearing a blue veil on her face, had her hands behind her back. Her beautiful eyes narrowed as she looked at the sky in the distance. It was as if her gaze had pierced through the entire ancient path of stars and saw Jian Wushuang and Qiulong who were fighting. Interesting. Lady Blue's face, which was covered by the veil, showed a smile. She said to herself, "Master, this time, I found 2 good seedlings for you." After saying that, a look of contemplation flashed across Lady Blue's eyes. With a wave of her right hand, a mystic light mirror appeared in her hand. The dark light mirror expanded in the wind and shot straight at the 18th city. All the races in the universe should watch such a battle. A faint voice came out of her mouth. The next moment, in the depths of the universe, regardless of whether it was the Great Void Temple, the Great Sun Divine Kingdom, the Defeng Divine Kingdom, or the Divine Life Palace, an image appeared in the sky above all the great powers. In the image, there was a giant that looked like a chaos demonic god and a huge dragon that covered the sky. They were fighting continuously, and the sky and earth were shattered. The 2 people were Jian Wushuang and Qiulong. Within the Great Void Temple, Emperor God Bingyi was sitting on the throne. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something. He took a step and appeared in the center of the Great Void Temple. The void there twisted, and a battle scene appeared. Jian Wushuang. The ice-blazed Divine Hall's master's eyes narrowed and a cold light flashed through them. Humph, they forced Qiulong to use his true form. No wonder the Divine Life Palace values him so much that they're even willing to start a war with the Great Void Temple. If this kid doesn't die, he'll definitely become a problem in the future. Within the Divine Life Palace, Supreme Bloodwave, Supreme Giant Axe, and Supreme Gai Fu raised their heads at the same time and looked at the void. The video of the battle between Qiulong and Jian Wushuang was also sent to the Divine Life Palace. The Blood Wave Supreme looked at Jian Wushuang, who was suppressing Qiulong, with a smile. Giant Axe. This little fellow has grown quite a bit stronger. He tilted his head and smiled at Supreme Giant Axe. Supreme Giant Axe raised his head to look at this scene and could not help but gently nod his head. He laughed heartily and said, "Blood Wave. I think the current Jian Wushuang is even stronger than the ninth Kulpa King when he was in the ultimate ruler realm." Supreme Blood Wave did not answer, but he agreed with Jian Wushuang. In the entire Divine Life Palace, he was the only one who knew that the ninth Kulpa King was a perfect level special life form, while Jian Wushuang was a special life form that had surpassed the perfect level. "Giant Axe, it looks like we two old guys have to work harder. Otherwise, we'll be surpassed by these juniors sooner or later." The ruler Blood Wave laughed. "Ha ha ha. Isn't that good?" Supreme Giant Axe laughed. Supreme Master Gai Fu, who was sitting cross-legged in the void, did not make a sound. However, when he raised his eyes to look at the battle scene, a smile appeared on his old face. In the deepest part of the universe, Cosmos Temple, they had also seen the battle between Jian Wushuang and Qiu Long. At that moment, in a hall, all the supreme beings in Cosmos Temple were staring at Jian Wushuang with extremely ugly expressions. At the head of the hall, a dignified middle-aged man wearing a black gold crown and a black gold dragon suit coldly glanced at the group of supreme martial artists below him and questioned, "When did Jian Wushuang appear? Why don't I know about it?" All the supreme martial artists in the hall were silent. After a long while, one of the black-robed supreme martial artists said hesitantly, "Hall Master, I met this man when 9 Phoenix Great Star area was facing the Great Calamity. However, he was only a third-level ruler at that time. I didn't expect him to reach this level in just tens of thousands of years." "Oh." The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple narrowed his eyes and asked indifferently, "Black Eagle Ruler, why didn't you kill him back then?" Upon hearing these words, a look of hatred appeared on the face of the Black Eagle Ruler. "Hall Master, when I was about to kill this man, Supreme Heart Slayer from the 9 Emperor Pavilion saved him." "Heart Slayer from the 9 Emperor Pavilion?" The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple muttered to himself, and a cold look flashed in his eyes. After a long while, the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple looked at Supreme Black Eagle and said coldly, "Black Eagle, I order you to go to the entrance of the ancient path of stars. Once Jian Wushuang comes out, kill him on the spot." In the Divine Life Palace, a 9th Kulpa King has already appeared, but another 9th Kulpa King is not allowed to appear. Otherwise, Cosmos Temple will be in deep trouble. Do you understand? When Black Eagle Supreme saw the cold gaze of the Hall Master of Cosmos Temple, he felt a chill in his heart. He quickly cupped his hands and replied, "I understand." As soon as he finished speaking, Supreme Black Eagle did not dare to delay any longer. He took a step forward and left Cosmos Temple, shooting toward the ancient path of stars. The Cosmos Temple fell silent. The Hall Master of Cosmos Temple raised his head again and looked at Jian Wushuang on the battle screen. A murderous intent flashed in his eyes. The 18th city on the ancient path of stars. This is the most powerful Abhijna of the Fire Dragon. If I'm not wrong, Qiu Long should belong to the Fire Dragon bloodline of the Dragon Clan. Jian Wushuang, you're in trouble. The Breath of Destruction is the trump card of the Fiery Dragon. I've read about it before. A supreme-level fiery dragon of the Dragon Clan turned 10 great star areas and billions of lives into ashes with one breath. The Overlord and the others looked at Qiu Long and discussed in a low voice. They were all worried about Jian Wushuang. Ruler Hao Jin clenched his fists, his heart in his throat. Lord Bloodsword will be fine. It definitely won't. He kept telling himself this in his heart. Above the 9 heavens. Jian Wushuang, you are indeed very strong. You are the strongest ruler that I have ever seen since the ancient times. Even if I were to encounter you when I was still in the supreme divine realm, I'm afraid that I would be in a difficult situation. Amazing! Qiu Long exclaimed, but the coldness in his eyes did not decrease at all. Instead, it became even colder. He knew that if Jian Wushuang did not die this time, he would be the next one to die. Countless lava gushed out from the deepest part of his body and condensed in his mouth. It's a pity that you've encountered me. All right, Jian Wushuang, die. Secret skill. Pillar of fire dragon, breath of destruction. Boom! A pillar of fire that could destroy the world shot out from his mouth. This pillar of fire was extremely terrifying. The destructive aura it emitted was enough to make the heavens and earth tremble and the chaos boil. This was the last superpower of Qiulong, and it was also the strongest killing move that he had prepared for Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's black hair flew in the air, and his entire face was slightly red from the reflection of the fire. He looked at the raging fire pillar that was engulfing heaven and earth and destroying the world. His divine body began to shrink continuously until it returned to its ordinary appearance. The next moment, his 5 well-defined fingers gripped the hilt of the Wuxia divine sword and said calmly, "Qiulong, in the past 10,000 years, I have specially prepared a sword for you. Watch this sword. The name of this sword is Daybreak. Wang." A golden light suddenly appeared. As soon as Jian Wushuang finished speaking, he lifted the Wuxia divine sword in his hand. In an instant, he and the Wuxia divine sword turned into a soaring golden light and rushed toward the pillar of fire. The speed of the golden light was extremely fast. Like a bolt of lightning, it split the sky into 2 and slammed into the pillar of fire. No words could describe the horror of this sword. The pillar of flames that emitted a destructive aura was directly split in the middle when it met the golden light, as if it was a knife piercing through tofu. Sharp. There was nothing special about this sword except that it was so sharp that it could cut the world apart. If the eternal night was the deprivation that was hidden behind the darkness, then this sword attack was the crushing and crushing from the front. In the void, there was a whistling sound. The Overlord, the 9-star saint, and the others felt the dazzling golden light. They could not help but step back and cover their eyes. At this moment, under the dazzling golden light, the sun that hung high in the sky seemed to have dimmed. Poochie! With a muffled sound, the pillar of fire that reached the sky was completely broken apart. How is that possible? Qiulong's pupils contracted, and for the first time, a look of disbelief appeared on his face. However, before he could react, the golden light had already flashed across his neck like a golden lightning. Behind Qiulong, the golden light that Jian Wushuang had turned into stopped. Then, the light dispersed, revealing a black-haired and expressionless Jian Wushuang. The strong wind made Jian Wushuang's black clothes and black hair flutter. Jian Wushuang turned around slowly with an indifferent expression. When everyone saw this scene, they could not help being stunned. It was as if nothing had happened. However, at this moment, roar! Qiulong let out an extremely shrill roar. A line of blood suddenly appeared on his neck, and endless dragon blood spurted out. Clang! The entire dragon head fell to the ground. This sword directly chopped off Qiulong's head. This was not the end. The sky and the earth began to shake violently. Rumble! Under everyone's horrified eyes, the earth and the sky began to split. A huge sword mark gradually appeared. Under this sword mark, the entire 18th city, 100,000 miles of mountains and rivers, were penetrated by the sword mark and divided into 2 sides. The Daybreak sword not only cut off the head of the Qiulong, but also split the 18 cities into 2. One sword to destroy the city. Hiss! The Overlord, the 9-star saint, and the others gasped. They were all shocked to the extreme. Only the rulers on the ancient path of stars knew what kind of concept it was to be able to create such terrifying power with a single sword strike. This sword strike is enough to kill any ultimate ruler in the world. The Overlord's eyes were focused as he said in a deep voice. He had the rare immortal Overlord body, which had amazing defensive power. Even when he had fought with Qiulong could not do anything to him for a while without using his trump card. However, he was now absolutely certain that even if there were 10 of him, he would not be able to withstand this sword. As for the blood god, he had already fled madly, afraid that Jian Wushuang would settle the score with him. At this moment, it was not just on the ancient path of stars. Countless top forces outside the ancient path of stars were watching the battle. Their eyes shone brightly and they exclaimed in surprise, "This sword is comparable to a supreme martial artist." The blood waved supreme and the supreme giant axe exclaimed in surprise. Even supreme martial artist Guy Fu let out a soft gasp of surprise as a look of surprise appeared on his face. This sword, it's somewhat familiar. Supreme martial artist Guy Fu seemed to have thought of something, and a thoughtful look flashed across his eyes. Within the solar star field, this was the habitat of the Golden Crows. The battle between Jian Wushuang and Qiulong was also shown here. The Golden Crow Prince's expression was dark, and he clenched his fists without saying a word. Suddenly, a deep and majestic voice sounded behind him. Lin don't find trouble with this person anymore. You can't defeat him. Hearing this, the Golden Crow Prince quickly turned around and cupped his hands. Father! The person who had just spoken was none other than the great Emperor Jin Wu. Yes, this kid has grown up. From this sword, it can be seen that if this kid dies without any accident, he will definitely have a place among the peak people of the universe in the future. The deep and majestic voice came again. But I almost died in his hands. If I don't get my revenge, I won't be able to accept it. The Golden Crow Prince clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. He did not dare to struggle. Idiot! You're the son of the great Emperor Jin Wu. If you don't have this much magnanimity, what great things can you achieve? The great Emperor Jin Wu snorted coldly. After a moment of silence, he continued, Of course, you don't have to be afraid of him. It's fine as long as you don't deliberately provoke him. After all, you're the prince of my Golden Crow clan and can't lose your status. If this child dares to provoke you, as long as I'm alive, no one in this world will be able to bully you. My son. I understand. The Golden Crow Prince took a deep breath, and a look of enlightenment flashed in his eyes. He lowered his head and replied respectfully. He's able to accept what he's got. This is the attitude that the prince of the Golden Crow clan should have. The Golden Crow's eyes glinted with relief before he changed the topic. Let's continue watching. Those guys from the Dragon Clan probably can't sit still any longer. Within the ancient path of stars, although Qiulong's head was cut off by Jian Wushuang, he did not die easily. Dark golden dragon blood gushed out of his mouth as he stared at Jian Wushuang without saying a word. Qiulong, I've said it before. You're the one who's going to die today, not me. I, Jian Wushuang, always keep my word. Jian Wushuang walked down from the sky, looked down at Qiulong, and said indifferently. Qiulong stared at Jian Wushuang and suddenly laughed. A strange look appeared in his eyes. Jian Wushuang, do you believe that you can't kill me? Is that so? Jian Wushuang's expression was calm. He held the Wuxia divine sword upside down and walked toward him step by step. A great amount of divine power started to gather in Jian Wushuang's hands. It seems like you don't believe me? Qiulong chuckled and shook his head. Jian Wushuang, you won't understand. We, the members of the Dragon Clan, can only be killed by the Dragon Clan and buried in the Dragon Graveyard. Even if I'm expelled by the Dragon Clan, this will not change. Jian Wushuang was expressionless. He raised his arm and slashed at Qiulong's head with the Wuxia divine sword. Ding! However, at this moment, a huge resistance force suddenly came from Qiulong's body. The Wuxia divine sword in Jian Wushuang's hand seemed to have hit an invisible wall and could not fall any further. Jian Wushuang, I told you, you can't kill me. A mocking look appeared on Qiulong's face as he laughed fearlessly. The next moment, a huge shadow appeared behind him. This phantom was wearing black armor with mysterious patterns on it. The waistcoat was formed by 2 dragon claws, and it had a dragon head and a human body. The black eagle had an indifferent expression. He glanced at Jian Wushuang indifferently and said indifferently, Human, I'm Dragon 9, the law enforcer of the Dragon Clan. The members of the Dragon Clan must be handed over to the Dragon Clan to deal with. I'll give you the time it takes for an incense stick to burn to send Qiulong out of the ancient path of stars. The Dragon Clan will send someone to pick up Qiulong and bring him back to the Dragon Clan. The Dragon Clan's law enforcer? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and then, as if he didn't hear anything, divine power poured into the Wuxia divine sword in his hand and pressed down on the Qiulong's head inch by inch. Ka ka ka! In an instant, the void above the Qiulong's head was filled with the sound of glass breaking. In an instant, Qiulong and the Dragon Clan's law enforcers' faces changed. Human, I'm talking to you. Did you not hear me? The illusionary figure of the Dragon Clan's law enforcer squinted his eyes, which emitted a cold and sharp light. You're too noisy, Jian Wushuang shouted coldly, and continued to stab at Qiulong's head with the Wuxia divine sword in his hand. When the Dragon Clan's law enforcement officer saw this, he was instantly enraged to the extreme. He opened his mouth and scolded sternly. I'll give you the last 3 breaths. Now. Immediately. He immediately stopped what he was doing. After that, we'll send Qiulong out of the ancient path of stars and let him be punished by our Dragon Clan. Impudent. Human, are you challenging my authority? Are you challenging the dignity of the dragon race? When the Dragon Clan's law enforcement officer saw this, he was instantly enraged to the extreme. He opened his mouth and scolded sternly. I'll give you the last 3 breaths. Now. Immediately. He immediately stopped what he was doing. After that, we'll send Qiulong out of the ancient path of stars and let him be punished by our Dragon Clan. Otherwise, you will bear the consequences. 3, 2, you're too noisy. Without waiting for him to finish, Jian Wushuang slashed his sword and shattered the illusionary shadow of the Dragon Clan's enforcer. You're just a mere consciousness phantom without any divine power. Even if you were here in person, you wouldn't be able to stop me from killing someone. Jian Wushuang sneered, and with a flip of his hand, the Wuxia divine sword stabbed toward Qiulong's head again. Qiulong, you will die today. This time, Qiulong's expression finally changed drastically. Jian Wushuang, stop. Do you know what you are doing now? Qiulong was shocked and angry. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang's lips curved into a mocking arc, and he said indifferently, Are you afraid now? Qiulong's expression was livid, and he replied, Jian Wushuang, do you know the consequences of killing me? The Dragon Clan's enforcer represents the dignity of the Dragon Clan. You have shattered his consciousness shadow, so the Dragon Clan will never let you off. They will definitely allow anyone who has provoked the Dragon Clan to live. After a short pause, Qiulong's expression softened and he continued, The only way for you to survive is to let me go. I promise that when I return to the Dragon Clan, I will be able to speak to you. How about it? Not much. Jian Wushuang laughed sarcastically and without any hesitation. He stabbed the Wuxia divine sword into Qiulong's head. Roar! As Qiulong roared in pain, he began to struggle violently and smashed the surroundings madly. Jian Wushuang held the hilt of the sword tightly with both hands and stabbed it into the Wuxia divine sword on Qiulong's head. Waves of sharp sword qi burst out continuously and shattered the divine power that belonged to the Dragon Clan in Qiulong's body. Countless drops of dragon blood splattered on Jian Wushuang's face, but he did not react at all. He was extremely indifferent to Qiulong's cries. The Overlord, the 9-star Saint, and the others were all stunned by this scene. Their lips trembled as they said, "To dragon slaying. Jian Wushuang is killing a dragon. I don't know how many years it has been, but it hasn't left the universe. Who would dare to kill a member of the Dragon Clan? This is the Dragon Clan. The Dragon Clan will be in charge of the Dragon Clan. This is a rule set at the birth of the universe. Jian Wushuang actually dared to break this rule. Even the Great Void Temple only suppressed Qiulong and did not kill him because they were considering the reaction of the Dragon Tribe. Now, Jian Wushuang has destroyed the illusionary shadow of the Dragon Clan's law enforcer and killed Qiulong. The Overlord and the others were not the only ones who were shocked. Even in the universe, the top forces were watching this scene with their eyes shining. Humph! Jian Wushuang is really stupid. In the Great Void Temple, Supreme Bing Yi snorted coldly as he had already sentenced Jian Wushuang to death in his heart. A dragon had a reverse scale that would kill anyone who touched it. The Dragon Clan's reverse scale was his high and mighty prestige. Whoever dared to challenge the Dragon Clan's dignity had to be prepared to die. In the Cosmos Temple, the Palace Master, who was wearing a black gold crown and a purple gold royal robe, also smiled. The sins of the heavens can be forgiven, but the sins of one's own cannot be lived. Now it seems that the little guy from the Divine Life Palace is already dead without the help of Cosmos Temple. All of a sudden, the entire universe was abuzz with discussions about Jian Wushuang killing the dragon. Some people sneered. Jian Wushuang was cutting off his own future and acting on impulse. Some people sighed. If Jian Wushuang had let Qiulong go, the Dragon Clan wouldn't have let him go easily based on what he had done. However, Jian Wushuang had put himself in danger. Only a burst of hearty laughter came from the Divine Life Palace. Ha 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 ha! This little guy doesn't even give face to the Dragon Clan. He's really different from ordinary people. I'm really more and more fond of him. The ruler Blood Wave laughed in a carefree manner. On the other hand, Supreme Being Giant Axe seemed a little worried and said, Blood Wave, I'm afraid the Dragon Clan won't let Jian Wushuang go so easily. The ruler Blood Wave narrowed his eyes and sneered. Jian Wushuang is a member of the Divine Life Palace, and he is considered half a disciple of mine. If the Dragon Clan finds trouble with him, Blood Wave, will take the blame for him. What's there to fear? Supreme Giant Axe could not help but smile wryly. He shook his head and did not say anything. In the universe, there were many discussions about Jian Wushuang. Meanwhile, in the 18th city on the ancient path of stars, as the sword essence of the Wuxia divine sword in Jian Wushuang's hand continued to burst out in Qiulong's head, finally, Qiulong's struggle gradually weakened. At the last moment, Qiulong no longer looked like he was struggling. Instead, he stared at Jian Wushuang and said with hatred, Jian Wushuang, it doesn't matter if I die. Don't worry, you will come down to accompany me soon. Bang! With a loud explosion, the dragon's body completely collapsed. Starting from the dragon's tail, it dissipated inch by inch. Qiulong was dead. Under everyone's watchful eyes, Qiulong's body completely collapsed. Starting from his tail, he disappeared inch by inch. Finally, like a sand painting being blown by the wind, he turned into dust and disappeared from the world. At this moment, the entire ancient path of stars became deathly silent, leaving behind only the sound of heavy breathing. Everyone raised their heads and looked at the black-robed figure standing in the void. His expression was indifferent, and he held a sword in his right hand. His handsome face was cold, and there was no joy or sorrow on it. However, such an ordinary and thin figure was like a god in their eyes at this moment, so bright that they could not see him. There were many invincible rulers in the universe, but only at this moment could Jian Wushuang be called truly invincible. I knew it. He can always create miracles. Commander Mountain Shaker let out a long breath. It was only when Qiulong died that his heart truly fell. Ruler Hao Jin's face was filled with excitement, and he clenched his fists. Lord Bloodsword was still the same Lord Bloodsword. He would never disappoint anyone. Wang. With Qiulong's death, an interspatial ring also broke, and countless precious divine materials dropped from it. The most eye-catching ones were dozens of god-sealing monuments. Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed, and he put the countless divine materials and origin stones, as well as the dozens of investiture of the gods, into his interspatial ring. Then Jian Wushuang walked down from the void. Break! He flicked his sleeve, and the two black chains binding ruler Hao Jin's shoulder blades were instantly shattered. Before ruler Hao Jin could even fall from the stone shelf, an invisible force lifted him up. Thank you, Lord Bloodsword. Ruler Hao Jin's body trembled, and his eyes couldn't help but turn red. No one knew how much torture he had suffered in the past 10,000 years. His divine body was constantly crushed and reassembled, and his divine soul was burned by flames. If it were anyone else, they would have collapsed long ago. The reason why he had persisted for so long was none other than the words that Jian Wushuang had sent to his mind before he died. Wait for me. He had waited for Jian Wushuang for 10,000 years just because of these 3 words. Finally, Jian Wushuang came. Don't call me Lord Bloodsword. Just call me Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang looked at ruler Hao Jin with an apologetic look. If it weren't for him, ruler Hao Jin wouldn't have come and been tortured by Qiulong for such a long time. The next moment, Jian Wushuang placed his right hand on ruler Hao Jin's shoulder. A gentle divine power flowed through Jian Wushuang's right hand and into ruler Hao Jin's divine body, helping him heal his injuries and recover his divine power. Hao Jin, from now on, as long as I'm here on the ancient path of stars, you won't be bullied in the slightest. Thank you, Lord Bloodsword. Ruler Hao Jin dropped to his knees, tears of gratitude streaming down his face. Jian Wushuang shook his head. He reckoned that it was impossible for ruler Hao Jin to change his mind now. He did not force the issue. He turned to the overlord and the others and said, "All of you, come over. I want to restore order on the ancient path of stars." Yes, the overlord, the 9 stars Saint's son, and the young clan leader of the Maluo clan looked at each other. They were all nervous. Now, Jian Wushuang's strength was enough to sweep the entire ancient path of stars. No one could keep him in check. Jian Wushuang had already become the first person on the ancient path of stars. If Jian Wushuang wanted to kill them all like Qiulong, they would not be able to do anything. I hope Jian Wushuang will not be the second Qiulong. The overlord, the 9 stars saint, and the others all sighed in their hearts. Within the powers of the universe. As Jian Wushuang killed Qiulong, the image in the void stopped. In an instant, the entire universe was in an uproar. The name Jian Wushuang had completely spread far and wide, causing a sensation in the entire universe. Everyone knew that an extraordinary figure had appeared in the ultimate ruler realm. At this moment, the divine life palace was in an uproar. Jian Wushuang killed Qiulong and became a god in one battle. Jian Wushuang is the number 1 on the ancient path of stars. No one can stop him. Jian Wushuang is the only dragon slayer in the same realm since ancient times. Jian Wushuang will become the second strongest person in the ruler realm after the 9th Kulpa King. The disciples of the Divine Life Palace were all extremely excited, and they ran around telling each other. The Divine Life Palace was one of the top powers in the universe and had been silent for far too long. However, this time, Supreme Blood Wave and Supreme Giant Axe had attacked the Great Void Temple first to inform the entire universe that no disciple of the Divine Life Palace should be humiliated. Later on, Jian Wushuang had succeeded in killing the dragon and became the number 1 on the ancient path of stars. They had never felt the power of the Divine Life Palace before. How fortunate, how glorious! These words were deeply imprinted in the minds of every disciple of the Divine Life Palace. Meanwhile, back in the 6th mountain range, Lung Rushuang, who had just come out of her closed-door cultivation, looked at the disciples of the Divine Life Palace flying by in the sky. She frowned when she saw their excited faces. She stopped one of the disciples and asked in confusion, "May I ask what happened in the Divine Palace? Why is everyone so excited?" The disciple of the Divine Life Palace rolled his eyes and thought to himself, "The news of Jian Wushuang's death was sealed by Supreme Blood Wave's order. Now that Jian Wushuang has returned and become the No. 1 on the ancient path of stars, I should be able to tell him, right?" Clearing his throat, the disciple of the Divine Life Palace cupped his hands and said respectfully, "Madam, you may not know this, but your husband Jian Wushuang has become the first person on the ancient path of stars." "What?" Lung Rushuang raised her eyebrows and thought to herself, "It seems that I've missed a lot of things during my closed-door cultivation. Senior brother, can you tell me more about it?" she asked. Naturally. The news about the battle between Jian Wushuang and Qiulong spread to all parts of the universe at an extremely fast speed. All of a sudden, all parts of the universe were filled with discussions about Jian Wushuang. Some busybodies even conferred Jian Wushuang the title of being below supremes and above rulers. At this moment, in a remote star field in the universe. This star area was called the Void Wind Star Area. It was not ranked among the major star areas in the universe. The resources in this star area were scarce, and very few experts were willing to stay. The highest cultivation base among them was only the ultimate ruler. In the Void Wind Starfield, in the largest astral world, the Mountain Sun Astral, there was a mountain that reached into the clouds and the peak was covered in clouds all year round. There was a rumor in the Mountain Sun Star world that there were celestials living on this mountain. A simple and honest-looking young man and a rather mischievous girl were sitting on the edge of the mountain, shaking their fair and tender legs. If Jian Wushuang was here, he would have recognized them as the disciples of Water Sorcerer Ruler, whom he had met once in the Zenith Ruins. Junior sister Qingxi, are you thinking about that person again? Ran Gu sat down next to her, glanced at her, and said in a mischievous tone. When Qingxi heard this, her pretty face couldn't help but blush. She said angrily, "Senior brother? What are you saying? Don't spout nonsense." She bared her fangs and brandished her claws, like a little tiger bluffing. Upon seeing this, Rangu immediately laughed and said, "I didn't even say that person's name. How do you know who I'm talking about?" After that, he reached out and rubbed Qingxi's hair. He chuckled and said, "Although we haven't had much contact with Brother Bloodsword, I can tell that he's a dragon and phoenix among men. If you like him, why not? It can't be considered embarrassing." After a pause, he continued, "Besides, didn't Master already say that he's willing to help you find Brother Bloodsword?" Hearing this, Qingxi's face turned red, but she did not refute him. She just lowered her head and did not dare to look at Rangu. Her two lily-white hands clenched the corners of her clothes tightly. At this moment, a beam of light shot over from the horizon. Rangu and Qingxi quickly stood up. Master has returned from his travels. The escaping light dissipated, revealing the figure of an old man. It was Water Sorcerer Ruler, whom Jian Wushuang had befriended back in the Taro ruins. "Master, is junior sister Qingxi thinking about that person again? Master, have you heard any news about Brother Bloodsword?" Rangu said with a smile. "Master, don't listen to senior brother's nonsense." Qingxi rolled her eyes at Rangu, but she could not hide the anticipation in the depths of her eyes. However, the Water Sorcerer Ruler's expression was a little strange today. He glanced at Qingxi with a complicated expression and said slowly, "Qingxi, let's drop the matter of Bloodsword. Don't think about it anymore." "Ah!" Qingxi shuddered and hurriedly raised her head to look at Water Sorcerer Ruler. "Let's go," the Water Sorcerer Ruler said expressionlessly, striding past them without another word. "Master, why? Let's go," Rangu shouted at Water Sorcerer Ruler back. Water Sorcerer Ruler came to a halt upon hearing this question. "There's no reason." Water Sorcerer Ruler stepped into a private room. Bang! The door of the room was tightly closed. Outside the room, Qingxi bit her lower lip hard, and her eyes gradually welled up with tears. Rangu opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he sighed dejectedly, shook his head, and said nothing more. He knew that since his master said so, he must have his reasons. The two of them did not know. Water Sorcerer Ruler was looking out the window of a private room, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared at the two with a helpless expression. If he had no other choice, why would he say that? "Xiaoxi, it's not that I'm being unreasonable, but that Bloodsword is truly an important figure like a dragon in the sky. It's not something we can reach. Rather than asking to be humiliated later, it's better for me to cut the Gordian knot and help you remove your feelings as soon as possible." The news that Jian Wushuang had killed Qiu Long spread to every corner of the universe like a tornado. Cosmos Temple, Great Void Temple, 9 Emperor Pavilion. All the major forces had made a move because of Jian Wushuang. It was said that the 9 Emperor Pavilion had already upgraded Jian Wushuang's treatment to the highest level, comparable to that of a supreme. However, the Dragon Clan, which everyone had been looking forward to the most, had unexpectedly fallen silent. At first, everyone had predicted that the disgraced Dragon Clan would launch a storm of attacks on Jian Wushuang. However, the Dragon Clan did not. It was as if nothing had happened. They did not mention Jian Wushuang's name. However, everyone knew that the more the Dragon Clan acted this way, the more terrifying the situation was. As one of the most powerful races in the universe, the Dragon race would definitely not give up just like that. The Dragon race was only preparing for a world-shaking storm that would shock the universe. At that time, the storm would not only target Jian Wushuang, but also the Divine Life Palace, the Blood Wave Supreme, and so on. Meanwhile, in the depths of the ancient Path of Stars in the 18th city, under the protection of the rules, the 18th city, which had been reduced to ruins, was gradually beginning to recover. In a palace, Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged and was quietly packing up the loot he had obtained after killing Qiu Long. There was no need to mention the divine materials, divine medicine, and universe origin stones. As the supreme divine realm expert of the dragon race, Qiu Long had plundered the ancient Path of Stars for the past 10,000 years, and the number of things he had obtained could be counted in the sea. Just the number of universe origin stones alone was no less than 1 billion. As for divine materials, divine medicines, and some top-tier nomological true treasures, they were piled up like a mountain of garbage. Jian Wushuang did not care about these things. The treasures he had brought out from the Tarot ruins were enough for him to use up for several chaos cycles. No matter how many things he had, they were just numbers to him. However, Jian Wushuang was quite tempted by the investiture of the gods. In the past 10,000 years, Qiu Long had collected 85 investiture of the gods. It could be said that except for the deification tablets in the hands of the Overlord and the 9-star saint, the others had all fallen into the hands of Qiu Long. Of course, all of this naturally belonged to Jian Wushuang. Qiu Long's plundering over the past 10,000 years was just a wedding dress for Jian Wushuang. 85 investiture of the gods plus the 6 I have 91. It doesn't matter if I take the ones in the Overlord's hands or not. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered and he was deep in thought. If there were no accidents, it could be said that Jian Wushuang had already received the invitation to the great clan gathering. All he needed to wait for was time. Jian Wushuang collected his thoughts and continued to search for Qiu Long's relics. Soon, the two treasures caught Jian Wushuang's attention. One of them was an ancient bronze cauldron that had a missing leg. The bronze cauldron was square in shape, and its body was covered with mysterious and obscure runes. It should have had 4 legs, but one of them seemed to have been forcibly cut off, leaving only 3 legs. It was clearly incomplete. However, after Jian Wushuang's surging divine power fell into the ancient cauldron, it was like a stone ox entering the sea. Nothing could be detected and the grade could not be distinguished. One should know that with Jian Wushuang's current divine power, even if it was a universe law cardinal treasure with extreme power like the Wuxia divine sword, he could instantly figure out the truth and refine it to control it. I'm afraid the origin of this bronze cauldron is extraordinary. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and a thoughtful look flashed in his eyes. However, we'll have to wait until later to verify what this ancient bronze cauldron is. Shaking his head, Jian Wushuang ignored the cauldron and put it into his interspatial ring. Then, he looked at the second item that caught his attention. It was a black token with dragon patterns.